Hi guys. Tonight we wander back in time, and not just a little. You are stepping into the year 950 or so, into a Viking settlement where the snow outside piles up to your waist. The air stings your nostrils with every breath, and the winds whistle like wolves circling a farmstead. You tug your cloak tighter around your shoulders and approach the long, low structure ahead of you, the Longhouse. Its roof is weighted with thick sod, the walls braced against storms. Inside, there is life, warmth, and survival. But as you place your hand on the heavy timbered door, one thing becomes painfully clear. Without this house, without the strange way these people slept in winter, you probably wouldn't last the night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and the time where you are listening. I find it fascinating to know who's out there, curled up in different corners of the world, listening to a piece of history just before bed. Now, dim the lights and follow me in. The threshold is dark, the entryway low, forcing you to duck beneath the frame. As you step inside, the world outside, the shrieking wind, the crunch of snow, the blackness fades into the glow of fire and the steady murmur of people. Your boots, still crusted with ice, strike the packed earth floor. You can smell it immediately. Wood smoke, wet wool, a tang of animal hide. It's the smell of survival in the far north. The Longhouse stretches out like a ship turned upside down. Rafters loom above, thick beams running its length. Down the center, an open hearth crackles with flame, the smoke curling upwards into a haze that clings beneath the roof beams. It doesn't fully escape. There's only a small smoke hole cut into the turf roofing. You cough a little, but the warmth is worth the sting in your lungs. Archaeologists have long remarked that these smoky interiors probably shortened lifespans, but without the fire's heat, there would have been no lifespan at all. You feel the bite of cold still lingering along the edges of the room. The walls are built of timber, sometimes with wattle and daub, sometimes reinforced with turf cut from nearby fields. This thickness traps the warmth inside, though drafts still creep through cracks. Historians still argue whether the insulation was truly effective, or whether the Longhouse was perpetually chilly its comfort, depending on how many bodies, how many fires, how many animals shared the space. You can imagine how different scholars, huddled in their own cozy studies, debate about the chill of a Viking night while you stand here with your fingers stiffening in your gloves. Your eyes begin to adjust. Along both sides of the Longhouse are raised wooden benches. Some are covered in animal hides, reindeer, sheepskin, sometimes even bear if the family was wealthy or lucky. These benches double as daytime seating and nighttime sleeping platforms. You notice the furs piled thick, the surface is broad enough for two, sometimes three people to squeeze side by side. Privacy doesn't exist here. Families and guests sleep pressed shoulder to shoulder. Even servants or thralls might find a space at the edges, close to the animals. At the far end of the hall you glimpse movement cattle, a goat, maybe even a sheep. Yes, the animals are kept inside during the winter. Their body heat helps warm the house, and they're easier to protect from predators this way. The scent hits you too, a mixture of straw bedding, manure, and warm fur. It's pungent, but oddly comforting in its own way. Modern archaeologists sometimes smile at this arrangement. It's practical, if not glamorous. And it reveals just how communal survival was in the Viking Age. One quirky tidbit stands out to you. Some sagas mention beds with canopies or curtains, little alcoves cut into the walls. Not every Longhouse had them, but where they existed, they offered a slice of privacy. Imagine a little wooden cubicle curtained with wool, shutting out the smoke and chatter, giving you the illusion of solitude in a house crammed with 30 souls. You almost wish you had one now, but instead you shuffle closer to the hearth and feel the glow spread into your bones. You hear the rhythm of daily life settling down. Someone stirs a pot of stew that still hangs over the fire. A child laughs before being hushed. A man coughs into the smoke. The crackle of firewood competes with the sighing wind that sneaks through the walls. It's all strangely hypnotic. And you realize this is not luxury. This is not comfort in the modern sense, but it is safety, warmth, and community. The Longhouse was more than a shelter. It was the center of Viking life, the heart where people ate, worked, told stories, worshipped, and finally, when the night grew deep, lay down to sleep. The brutal winter outside presses against the walls. But here, among the firs, the smoke, the animals, and the steady breath of neighbors, you find a fragile cocoon of survival. You lower yourself onto one of the benches, the wood hard beneath you, the fur prickly against your cheek. You listen, you breathe, you prepare to follow the rhythm of the Longhouse, the strange half-dream of Viking winter sleep. You wake, or perhaps you never fully slept, and the first thing you notice is the wall at your back. Thick timbers press against the turf outside, a blend of wood and earth that tries, with all its crude ingenuity, to keep the deadly cold away. You press your palm to the surface. It is rough, resin-scented, and it sweats with condensation from the clash of fire-warmed breath inside and icy air outside. The Viking Longhouse is both fortress and sponge, holding heat but never entirely winning against the relentless Scandinavian winter. These walls are not random piles of wood. They are carefully chosen planks, sometimes oak if you're lucky, pine more often, set upright in the earth, or nailed together in a sturdy frame. Between them, gaps are stuffed with moss, animal hair, or clay. The outer layer may be sod chunks of turf sliced neatly from a meadow, their roots binding together like natural insulation. It is crude, but effective. You imagine standing in the driving snow, hacking squares of grassland like cake slices, then hauling them back to slap against your family's house. It sounds primitive, but when storms rage, you will be grateful for every muddy patch pressed into place. Mainstream historians often note that these turf-clad walls could be several feet thick, and their mass created a kind of thermal battery. By day, the fire's heat soaked into them, and by night it seeped slowly back out. Yet scholars still disagree about just how snug this made the interior. Some argue that with enough people, enough livestock, and a roaring hearth, the temperature could stay above freezing. Others believe it was still miserably cold, with frost forming along the interior planks. Picture yourself waking to find the wall glittering with ice crystals, shimmering in the dim glow of embers that's hardly the image of cozy domesticity. The walls also speak of symbolism. For the Viking, the Longhouse wasn't merely a shelter, it was an extension of the body. The timbers were ribs, the roof a spine, the doorway a mouth. You don't just enter a house, you enter the belly of a living thing that holds you safe until spring. Some archaeologists even suggest that the turf layers were meant to connect the house to the earth, grounding it in fertility and strength. Whether or not that's true, you feel the effect. The house seems alive, humming faintly with the breath of those who sleep inside. A quirky little fact: some longhouses had brightly painted beams or carved posts inside. Imagine stumbling half asleep past a wall beam decorated with swirling animal motifs, their eyes glaring at you in flickering firelight. These designs weren't just pretty, they were reminders of myth and ancestry, guardians against both winter and the uncanny beings said to lurk in the darkness. Your hand drifts along the seam where one timber meets another. You notice it leaks faintly, a thread of cold air slipping through. Children might have been tasked with plugging these gaps with tufts of wool or scraps of fabric. Some sagas even hint at the irritation of drafts that never quite stopped. You can almost hear a weary mother telling her son to stuff that hole before the baby freezes. You stretch your legs and let your eyes wander upward, tracing the join between wall and roof. The timbers meet in a clean triangular pitch, like a ship's hull inverted. Outside, snow piles thick against the sloping roof. Inside, the slope means smoke can rise and drift, slowly seeping through the hole cut in the top. But tonight, the air is still heavy, so smoke curls downward too, staining the walls black. Your lungs feel it, but your skin thanks you for the relative warmth. This house is not quiet. You hear creaks as the wooden walls expand and contract, as if they too are alive and groaning under the cold. Every gust outside makes the structure shudder slightly, a reminder of the fragile line between safety and exposure. And yet, as you run your fingers along the resinous grain, you sense resilience. These walls have stood for years and may stand for generations, patched and rebuilt with each new storm. Imagine now lying down with your back pressed against this timber wall. You feel its faint warmth, like the ghost of the fire that seeped into it during the day. Your ear picks up vibrations, the faint stamping of a cow tethered just a few paces away, the snores of a man across the hearth. You are never alone here. The walls enclose not just your body but your entire community, wrapping you in a shared cocoon of survival. As your eyes grow heavy again, you reflect on how different it is from your modern home. No thermostat, no central heating, just raw timber, turf, smoke, and the heat of many bodies. And somehow, against all odds, it works. You realize that this is not simply construction, it is endurance, carved from forests and meadows, hammered together with sweat and necessity. The wall against your back is not just a barrier to the cold, it is a reminder. Winter may be brutal, but you are not out there. You are in here, in the ribs of the Longhouse, cradled by earth and wood, safe enough to drift once more into sleep. You roll onto your side, and there it is, the center of everything. The hearth glows with a steady pulse, as if the Longhouse itself has a beating heart. Flames lick upward, orange tongues curling around blackened logs, sending warmth outward in uneven waves. Without this fire, you wouldn't last more than a night in the Scandinavian cold. It is not a matter of comfort, it is the single line between life and death. It's well documented that Viking longhouses almost always had a central fire pit, dug straight into the packed earth floor and lined with stones. The smoke rose to the rafters and escaped through a vent in the roof, but not quickly. It lingered, spread, and settled, half choking, half comforting. The glow illuminated the benches along the sides, the carved beams overhead. The children pressed close against their parents' arms. Imagine living your entire winter by the light of one flame. Something that might surprise you is how carefully fire was tended. Sparks weren't just struck casually each morning. Embers were treasured. A log smouldering through the night was nudged, coaxed, fed scraps of wood to keep it alive. If the flame died, it could mean frostbitten fingers before dawn. Some families carried embers from house to house, like borrowing sugar, ensuring no one wasted time fighting the wind to make a fresh spark. You picture a child racing across the icy ground, clutching a clay pot filled with glowing coals, smoke trailing behind him like a ribbon. There's no consensus about whether the hearth was left burning high into the night or dimmed low to save fuel. Some archaeologists argue that the crackling blaze doubled as a kind of night-long lamp, useful for watchfulness and warding off spirits. Others believe the flames were banked early, coals tucked under ash so they'd survive until morning without wasting wood. You lean closer now, feeling the bite of heat against your face, and wonder which of these versions you'd prefer, the fierce glow or the faint smoulder. The hearth does more than heat. It's the kitchen, the forge, the altar. Tonight you smell stew still hanging in the pot, rich with onions, barley, and salted fish. The scent makes your stomach growl, even though you've eaten. Earlier in the day, that same fire might have been used to repair tools or melt down a broken brooch into something new. In times of ritual, offerings were cast into the flames, bits of food, a splash of ale, the carved token of a god. To Vikings, this was not just a household necessity, it was sacred. Look closer. The stones ringing the fire are dark with years of use. Their surfaces are slick, some cracked from constant heat. These stones radiate warmth long after the logs collapse into ash. When you stretch your hands out, you don't only feel the fire, you feel the memory of hundreds of nights before, warmth soaked deep into stone and earth. That warmth cradles you now. Children curl at their parents' sides, lulled by the flicker of flame. A man rolls over and coughs, then pulls his cloak tighter around his shoulders. Across the way, a woman leans forward to whisper a story, her face glowing amber as if lit from within. The fire makes everything communal. No one has their own lamp. No one retreats into private rooms. The flame is the single focus, the single light by which every life here is measured. You hear a log crack, sharp as a whip, and sparks leap into the air. They swirl upward, joining the smoke that gathers in a heavy layer beneath the rafters. The sparks fade quickly, but for a moment they are like stars against a black sky. You follow them with your eyes until they vanish into the haze. Think of how fragile this arrangement is. The fire consumes wood constantly. Each family must gather, cut, and stack fuel in staggering quantities before winter. An average household might burn through entire trees every week. The crackle you enjoy now represents hours of backbreaking labor with axe and saw. You imagine trudging through the snow to drag branches home, hands numb, body aching, all so that you can sit here and stretch your toes toward this glow. You find yourself drifting into a rhythm. The fire pops, the coals shift, the shadows dance. It is hypnotic, almost musical. No wonder sagas were told in this light. No wonder oaths were sworn beside it. The fire isn't just physical, it's the anchor of memory and myth. Every story of gods and giants, of voyages across stormy seas, of battles fought and kinship claimed, was spoken into this smoke, carried upward to mingle with the rafters, staining them dark with centuries of words. The heat pushes against your skin. You lean back, aware of how uneven it is, your front warm, your back still chilled by the draft along the wall. Everyone here shifts constantly, turning like roasts on a spit, making sure no limb goes numb from cold. The Longhouse is never perfectly warm, but the hearth makes it survivable. One odd thought crosses your mind. Some scholars propose that people even dreamed differently in such environments. With smoke filling lungs and eyes, with heat and cold battling across the body, sleep might have been shallow, fragmented. Dreams may have been punctuated by coughing, stirring, waking to shift position. Yet in that half-dreaming, half-waking state, perhaps myths were born. Perhaps visions of gods stepping through smoke came easier when you were already halfway between worlds. The fire burns lower now, collapsing inward. Someone stirs, rises, and nudges the logs, adding a few more from the stack. Sparks fly again, briefly illuminating the carved post of the high seat where the chieftain sits by day. Even in his absence, the fire acknowledges his authority. It is his hall, his flame, his duty to provide warmth for his kin and guests. You let your eyelids droop, still watching the glow through half-shut lashes. You smell resin, fat, the faint sweetness of wood sap. You hear the sigh of flame when it catches new fuel, and for the first time, the cold outside feels truly distant. The longhouse may creak, the walls may leak, the smoke may choke, but here at the heart, with the hearth burning, you know you'll make it through the night. The warmth from the fire steadies you, but with it comes another companion smoke. You can't escape it. It curls in lazy ribbons above the flames, clings to your hair and clothes, and sinks into every beam of the longhouse. Your eyes water now and then, and you cough softly, joining the chorus of others clearing their throats in the haze. The hearth may be the house's heart, but the smoke is its breath, always present, always heavy. Most archaeological evidence shows that Viking longhouses had no chimneys as we imagine them today. Instead, smoke was left to wander freely, collecting beneath the rafters before drifting out through a hole in the roof or through gaps in the sod and timber. This design trapped heat more effectively, since not all the warmth vanished up a flue. Yet, it also meant every soul inside inhaled smoke each night, their lungs constantly filled with its sharp bite. Modern studies suggest that soot-lined rafters are often the best preserved traces archaeologists find. Those black stains are the fingerprints of countless fires, the permanent memory of survival etched into wood. Something curious to note is how smoke shaped the air itself. It wasn't simply unpleasant. It acted as a preservative. Drying meats hung from the rafters, keeping pests at bay, and even reducing rot in the timbers. In a way, the choking haze was both enemy and ally. A slab of pork dangling above your head might take on that smoky flavor over weeks, turning necessity into the ancestor of cuisine. You may cough now, but at least you're coughing with a belly that isn't empty. Researchers remain divided on whether the smoke hole at the roof's peak was large and efficient or tiny and symbolic. Some argue for a wide opening, deliberately crafted to let fumes escape and sunlight pierce through. Others suggest the hole was little more than a slit, sometimes even closed in stormy weather, making the interior all the more oppressive. You glance upward now. The beams vanish into a swirling haze. Somewhere above, you think you see the faintest trickle of starlight, though your stinging eyes might be playing tricks. Breathe carefully, you remind yourself. The air is warm, scented with burning pine and animal fat. The smoke scratches your throat, but you grow accustomed to it, just as generations before you did. Children would have grown up under this haze, their lungs trained early to endure it. You can picture a baby bundled in wool, blinking through the fog, soot already streaked on tiny cheeks. Life expectancy might have suffered for it, but survival demanded this balance: warmth against clean air, heat against health. You tilt your head and listen. The smoke reshapes the sounds of the Longhouse. Coughs echo damply, muffled as if wrapped in wool. The fire's crackle is muted under the constant low hum of voices. Even breathing feels louder here, each inhale a rasp. You wonder what it must have been like during feasts, when dozens of bodies crammed into the hall, the hearth blazing high, smoke rolling like thunderclouds just above everyone's heads. Perhaps laughter itself had a smoky timbre. One offbeat observation recorded by travelers centuries later was that smoke left a permanent smell on hair and clothes. It seeped into every fiber. People could carry the scent of their hall with them, a lingering badge of identity. Imagine walking into another village and being recognized instantly by the way your cloak reeked of last night's fire. Today, you might complain about clothes smelling after a barbecue. For them, it was the constant perfume of survival. Above you, meat hangs in rows, silhouettes swaying gently in the warm updraft. Fish, too, long and thin, their skin shining faintly. The smoke cures them, makes them last through months when hunting fails. You catch a drop of fat falling, sizzling as it hits the coals, sending up a burst of scent that makes your stomach churn between hunger and nausea. The rafters themselves are streaked black, their grain hidden under centuries of soot. Some archaeologists have wondered whether this accidental coating actually preserved the timbers, keeping them from rot. It's an ironic thought that something so suffocating might also grant longevity to the very beams that held the roof over your head. Without the smoke, the house itself might have died sooner. As your eyes adjust, you see shapes move in the haze. Is it a man shifting on his bench? Or something older, stranger, born of fire and smoke? Many believed that spirits lingered in this half-visible air, ancestors watching, gods listening. Smoke was not only nuisance but messenger, carrying prayers upward. You can imagine someone whispering to the fire, their words rising like sparks, blending into the darkness above. Perhaps the gods heard through the choking veil. The debate over how tolerable this life was remains unresolved. Some historians paint longhouses as miserable, lung-burning coffins of wood and turf. Others argue people adapted, finding ways to live comfortably in a haze that modern visitors could never tolerate. You sit here now, eyes stinging, lungs prickling, and you wonder where the truth lies. Perhaps it depends on perspective. When the outside air is so cold it can freeze your breath in seconds, a little smoke seems like a small price to pay. The fire pops again, drawing your gaze back down. Sparks leap upward, swallowed instantly by the gloom. The cycle continues. Flame, smoke, haze, cough, then relief as warmth settles back into your bones. You shift slightly, seeking a better pocket of air, just as every Viking did. No one ever found the perfect spot, but everyone learned to make do. Your hair smells of pine resin now, your skin sticky with the residue of fire. You know it will cling to you for days. And yet, lying here beneath rafters dark as a cave, you begin to appreciate the rhythm of it, the breathing of the house itself, exhaling smoke, inhaling warmth, keeping its people alive through a winter that shows no mercy. You stretch out further on the bench, and the first thing your hand touches is fur. Thick, tangled, and faintly musky, it prickles your skin with both warmth and coarseness. This is the bedding of the Longhouse. Not crisp linen sheets or feather-stuffed pillows, but hides and pelts spread thick across the wooden planks. You shift your weight, feeling the uneven textures. The silky underside of sheepskin, the wiry bristle of goat hair, the heavy softness of reindeer hide. Here, in the darkest months of the year, these layers are the difference between numb fingers and waking up alive. It's well recorded in excavations that Viking households used animal pelts extensively as bedding. Sheep, goats, cattle, and reindeer were all pressed into service long after their meat was eaten and their milk drunk. Furs and skins lined the benches, sometimes stitched into larger spreads, sometimes thrown haphazardly in piles. A wealthy household might have more exotic hides, bear, wolf, or fox taken in hunts or acquired through trade. The smell, however, was unavoidable. Even cured hides retained a pungent tang, especially in the smoky air of the hall. Imagine trying to fall asleep with that earthy, musky scent lodged in your nostrils. You might not expect this, but some hides were deliberately layered with the fur side down and skin side up. The reason? To minimize fleas and lice, which thrived in the dense undercoat. Of course, this only half worked. Before long, the pests adapted to whichever side was warmest. You scratch absently at your wrist, suddenly aware of the tiny crawling world that must have thrived beneath every Viking blanket. Specialists have long debated whether bedding was communal property or individually owned. Did families each have their own sets of hides, rolled up and stored when not in use? Or were furs shared by whoever claimed the space on the bench that night? Some sagas describe personal bedding, brought along when visiting other halls. Others imply it was just one great heap for all. You glance around now, people lie shoulder to shoulder, children nestled in folds of pelt, dogs sprawled at their feet. It feels more like one massive, furry nest than a collection of personal beds. The sensation is unlike anything you're used to. The hides trap warmth effectively, holding body heat against you, but they are also coarse. Reindeer fur is notorious for shedding, leaving prickly hairs clinging to your clothes and skin. Sheep wool, when unprocessed, can itch unbearably. You turn, and a sharp rib bone hidden beneath the layers pokes your hip. Comfort is not guaranteed here. Instead, it's survival wrapped in hair and hide. A curious detail often overlooked is how bedding doubled as clothing. People slept in their tunics and cloaks, pulling furs over themselves like heavy quilts. There was no ritual of undressing before sleep. Quite the opposite. To remove garments was to invite frostbite. You picture yourself lying here, still laced into your wool tunic, boots by your side, cloak draped across your chest, while a reindeer hide seals the warmth around you. Perhaps you even curl beneath it with your axe close at hand, just in case. The furs hold memories too. Each pelt represents an animal once tethered in the yard, milked each morning, or hunted across snowy plains. Children may have recognized their old goat in the bedding beneath them. The hide of a prized cow might comfort the family long after her last meal was served. In this way, the bedding was both practical and sentimental, a reminder that survival came through sacrifice. You run your fingers across the seams of one-stitched hide. The needlework is crude, thick thread, tugging unevenly, yet it holds. Viking women were skilled in sewing and mending, turning scraps of hide into larger, usable blankets. These patchwork furs covered gaps and cracks, sometimes even hung along the walls to block drafts. The result is a space cocooned in animal skins, like sleeping inside a giant coat. The benches groan under the weight of all this layering. Underneath, storage hides spare tools, bags of grain or smaller bundles of fur kept dry. You imagine rummaging there in the dark, pulling out an extra pelt when the frost bit too sharply, or perhaps spreading them on the floor for visiting guests when the benches were already full. There's a peculiar intimacy in this arrangement. Lying so close to others, pressed against the same hides, breathing the same smoky air, you share warmth whether you like it or not. Privacy dissolves in the dark. Every cough, every sigh, every toss and turn is felt across the bedding. A neighbor's elbow digs into your ribs. A child's cold toes brush your calf. A dog snuffles against your side. Yet in the harshest winter, this closeness is protection. The hides are only as effective as the bodies beneath them. You glance toward the fire again. A woman turns a hide to dry its damp underside against the flames, careful not to scorch it. Wet fur smells acrid, but dampness would mean cold. Some pelts were beaten clean of snow before being laid out, but in storms, dampness was inevitable. The fire became a constant laundry line, drying hides even as it smoked the rafters. What you realize, lying here, is that bedding in a Viking hall was never about softness. It was about layering. Every fold of hide was another thin wall between flesh and frost. Comfort was accidental, a byproduct of necessity. And yet, in the half-light, with smoke rising and embers glowing, there's something strangely reassuring about sinking into this patchwork nest. You feel part of a chain animal, human, hide, hearth, all woven together to withstand the long, pitiless winter. As you shift again, the fur rustles beneath you, releasing a faint puff of dust and old smoke. You settle deeper, pulling the reindeer hide tighter across your shoulders. Its musky scent fills your nose, its warmth cradles your body. Around you, others snore gently, their breath rising in soft clouds. The Longhouse creaks, the fire hisses, and under your palms, the furs feel like both barrier and bond, scratchy, imperfect, yet essential. And so you drift, cushioned by the memory of animals, embraced by warmth stolen from the wild, one more sleeper in a hall built on hides and survival. You turn your head slightly, and the furs shift beneath you with a dry whisper. Along the benches, shapes lie side by side, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the closeness more necessity than choice. The Viking Longhouse is not a place of solitude at night. It is a living dormitory where kin, guests, and sometimes servants share the same stretch of planks. Privacy dissolves into warmth, and warmth is what everyone needs most. One widely accepted detail is that these benches, which lined both sides of the hall, doubled as daytime seating and nighttime sleeping platforms. During feasts or meetings, people sat upright, drinking ale, listening to sagas. But when darkness deepened, cloaks and furs were pulled across bodies, and the benches became communal beds. Imagine a long wooden shelf running down the wall, wide enough for 3 or 4 to lie side by side. Now picture it filled from end to end, a patchwork of limbs and breath, the air dense with smoke and human closeness. You might not expect this, but the seating order of the day often carried into the sleeping arrangement at night. The head of the household and honored guests lay near the central fire, enjoying the best heat. Children nestled between parents or grandparents, safe at the core. Thralls and low-status individuals were relegated to the edges, sometimes even on the floor. The benches, therefore, were not just practical furniture, they reflected hierarchy, warmth distributed according to rank. There's no consensus about how comfortable this communal closeness truly was. Some scholars imagine it as unbearably cramped, noisy, and restless, a forced intimacy that left little room for deep sleep. Others suggest it was accepted without complaint, even welcomed, since human warmth was as effective as any blanket. In a land where nights stretched endlessly in winter, perhaps being surrounded by the steady breathing of others was as reassuring as it was necessary. You lie still now, listening. Each sleeper adds their sound to the nighttime chorus. Someone snores with a low, rattling growl. Another mutters in a dream. A child whimpers softly before being hushed by a mother's hand. Beneath it all runs the constant background of animal breath, hooves shifting in straw, the muffled chewing of a goat. At first it seems chaotic, but after a while the noise weaves into rhythm, a lullaby of survival. Think of the warmth this generates. Your own shoulder presses against another's, your legs tucked against the curve of a neighbor's knees. The body heat spreads invisibly, turning the benches into radiators of flesh and breath. In fact, some researchers have calculated that in a crowded hall, the combined heat of dozens of sleepers could raise the temperature noticeably. It was less about comfort and more about creating a human furnace against the dark. Something unusual worth mentioning. Sagas sometimes describe bedfellows, not in the romantic sense, but simply as companions who shared a sleeping place for warmth or convenience. A traveller might be invited to lie next to his host, not as a breach of custom, but as a practical matter. In this world, bodies were resources, and sharing space was part of the unspoken contract of hospitality. You imagine walking into a hall, being offered ale, and then told cheerfully, "Find a spot next to me when we lie down." Strange to modern ears, but essential here. The benches themselves creak as people shift. They are nothing more than wide planks supported by sturdy posts, covered in hides. You feel the wood beneath the layers, solid yet unyielding. A hip pressed too long into it grows sore, so people roll often, disturbing their neighbors. But no one complains. Everyone understands the trade: discomfort for warmth, closeness for survival. This arrangement shapes the way you dream. Surrounded on all sides, you drift in and out of sleep, never entirely alone. A hand brushes your arm, a child's breath warms your neck. Someone stirs and pulls a cloak tighter. These tiny intrusions remind you constantly that you are part of a group. You belong to the hall, not to yourself. The line between your body and the next blurs into shared warmth, shared breath, shared existence. A curious social note: seating and sleeping near the fire was a mark of favor. If you were asked to lie close to the central hearth, it meant you were valued. To be pushed toward the edges was to be reminded of your low standing. In this way, even sleep became a performance of social order. The very position of your body at night told the story of your place in the world. The air grows heavier, the fire smoulders low, and the smoke thickens, sinking to mingle with your dreams. You cough, shifting closer to the body beside you, feeling the press of another's ribs against your own. It is not comfort as you know it, but it is warmth, and warmth means life. What scholars puzzle over is how people balanced intimacy with distance. Did couples insist on sleeping together, or did the press of the community blur those bonds? Were quarrels and resentments pushed aside at night for the sake of warmth? Some accounts suggest quarrels were common in the hall, but when darkness fell, grudges had to yield to necessity. Imagine lying shoulder to shoulder with someone you argued with at supper, forced by winter to share your breath until morning. The communal bench is more than a bed. It is a stage where every relationship, family, friendship, rivalry is acted out in the dark. The Longhouse, at night, is a body of its own, ribs lined with sleepers, heart glowing at the center, all breathing in unison. You are part of it now. You feel the closeness, the weight of it, the strange comfort of knowing you are never truly alone. As you sink deeper into the furs, you let yourself drift. A shoulder nudges yours. A hand curls unconsciously against your arm. Someone sighs, turning in their sleep. The bench creaks, the fire sighs, the house breathes. Together you breathe too, folded into the rhythm of a hall that survives through closeness. You shift slightly on the bench, and as your eyes adjust to the dim glow of the coals, you notice movement at the far end of the hall. A heavy shape stirs, then another. The sound is unmistakable, hooves scraping against the packed earth, the snuffle of warm breath in the cold air. Animals share this space with you, tethered along the back wall. They are more than food. In winter, they are heaters, breathing engines of survival that transform the longhouse into a barn as well as a bedroom. What we know with certainty is that Vikings kept livestock inside during the darkest months. Cows, goats, sheep, and sometimes pigs all had a place within the hall. Not in some neat pen away from the family, but often in the very same space where people lived and slept. Their presence added body heat, raising the temperature a few precious degrees. You hear it clearly now. The rhythmic chewing of a cow on her cud, the soft bleat of a sheep settling into straw, the impatient stamp of a hoof. Their warmth blends invisibly with that of the humans, a communal furnace made of flesh and fur. A little-known twist is that horses were usually kept outside, except in extreme storms. Horses were valuable, almost sacred, and they needed space. But in emergencies, even they might be led into the hall, snorting and restless, their bulk crowding the benches. Imagine lying in your fur bedding, drifting towards sleep, while a horse shifts uneasily a few feet away, its breath clouding the smoky air. That closeness to animals was both ordinary and extraordinary, an intimacy with livestock that modern people rarely experience. Some historians dispute just how integrated animals were. Did they wander freely through the hall, or were they confined to one end, separated by low wooden partitions? Excavations suggest both possibilities. In some sites, there are clear stalls lined with manure, hinting at designated animal zones. In others, evidence blurs, making it just as likely that creatures and humans moved among each other. Perhaps it depended on the wealth of the household or the design of the hall. Either way, the smell alone tells you they were near. And what a smell it is! You wrinkle your nose as the mingled scents wrap around you: smoke, wet wool, human sweat, and the pungent odor of livestock. It is sharp, earthy, and unforgettable. You try to breathe shallowly, but the scent is everywhere, woven into the timbers, clinging to furs, saturating every breath. Yet oddly, the smell reassures you. It signals life, warmth, food on the hoof, survival waiting for spring. Without these animals, winter would be lean indeed. The sounds, too, become part of the night's rhythm. A goat rustles in the straw, nibbling at the remains of yesterday's fodder. A cow exhales heavily, its warm breath creating little clouds in the cold. Now and then, the silence breaks with a loud snort or the clatter of hooves against the wooden posts that tether them. At first, the noises jar you, but as you lie longer, they begin to soothe, blending with the human snores into a single symphony of slumber. It might surprise you, but animals also offered a kind of security. Their restlessness warned of wolves or strangers outside. A sudden bout of stamping or anxious lowing could jolt the entire household awake, alerting them to danger long before human ears caught it. In this way, animals were not only heaters and food reserves, but also alarm systems. Their presence was another layer of survival woven into the fabric of nightly life. You shift your head toward them and watch shadows play across the straw. The cattle loom large, dark hulks barely distinguishable in the smoke. Their bodies radiate warmth that you can almost feel from across the room. You imagine pressing your hands into their hides, feeling the thick fur and solid muscle beneath. Children may have snuggled close to calves, not just for affection but for genuine heat. There's a peculiar intimacy here, one modern life has forgotten. To share your sleeping space with animals is to blur the line between household and barnyard, between humanity and the creatures that sustain it. You find yourself oddly comforted by their presence, even as you cough through the stench. They are part of the hall's body too, pumping warmth into the ribs of wood and turf. Academic debates linger about the hygiene of this arrangement. Some argue it bred disease, shortened lifespans, and filled the hall with parasites. Others counter that close quarters with animals were practical, even necessary, and that Viking families developed resilience against such conditions. You lie here, eyes watering, nose stinging, but skin warming, and you sense the truth lies somewhere between. Filth, yes, but also survival. A goat shifts closer to the tether's length, and for a moment its eye catches the firelight, glinting eerily. You blink, unsettled, then smile to yourself. It is only an animal, sharing the night. You settle again, pulling the fur tighter across your shoulders. The smell lingers, the sounds persist, the warmth builds. In this hall, in this winter, animals are not simply beasts of burden. They are companions in survival, breathing warmth into the same smoky darkness where you and your kin dream. You shift beneath the weight of the furs, and for the first time you notice what lies closest to your skin. Beneath the hides and blankets, your body is wrapped in wool and linen, the layered clothing that doubles as nightwear. There is no ceremony of changing before sleep. The garments you wear by day follow you into the night. In the dim light of the hearth, you study your sleeve, coarse wool woven tight, its fibers rough yet comforting against the chill. It's well established that wool was the Vikings' most reliable defense against cold. Spun from the fleece of sheep that bleated outside during the warmer months, wool kept warmth close to the body even when damp. Cloaks, tunics, and leggings were all cut from this indispensable fabric. Linen, woven from flax, was softer but harder to come by in the north. Worn beneath the wool, it offered a smooth layer that made sleep more bearable. You tug at your collar now, feeling the prick of fibers against your neck. Without these layers, lying in the smoky longhouse, you would be shivering. Something unexpected. Viking textiles were not always drab. Dyes made from plants, lichens, and imported pigments added color-deep reds, blues, and yellows. Excavations of burial mounds reveal traces of dyed wool that suggest people went to sleep not in dull rags, but in garments touched with color, even in the dead of winter. Imagine a row of sleepers, wrapped in reds and blues beneath the firelight, turning the benches into a muted rainbow of survival. There is no agreement, however, on whether people reserved night clothes. Some argue that garments doubled for every purpose: work, feast, and sleep. Others suggest that wealthier families had special undergarments, lighter tunics for sleeping, perhaps cleaner linen layers washed less rarely than outer clothing. You look down at your own outfit, heavy with smoke and animal scent, and wonder how restful sleep could be when your skin never fully escaped the grime of the day. The sensation is vivid. Wool is scratchy, especially when worn directly on bare skin. Your legs itch beneath the coarse leggings, your chest rubs uncomfortably under the thick tunic. Yet the alternative is far worse. Without wool, you would be naked against the drafts, exposed to a cold that cuts deeper than any itch. You tug the cloak tighter, its weight pressing you into the hides, and feel a wave of warmth spread across your body. Comfort is relative, and in this hall, warmth is luxury. A small oddity worth noticing is how clothing itself became bedding. Cloaks were spread out like blankets, shared among sleepers. Children might be wrapped in a parent's outer garment, swaddled in a cocoon of wool. Even shoes were sometimes left on through the night, lest frostbite claim toes before morning. You picture yourself shifting uncomfortably in bed with boots still strapped, and realize how little choice these people had. The smell of the fabric is unmistakable. Smoke has woven itself into every thread. The wool carries the musk of lanolin, the natural oil of sheep that lingers even after spinning. Linen, when present, smells faintly of grass and earth. Together, the scents create a patchwork as distinctive as the hides on the benches. You inhale, half reluctant, half comforted. This is not the sterile scent of modern bedding, but the raw perfume of a life lived close to animals, fields, and fire. You glance around the hall. A child wriggles in her mother's arms, tugging at her woolen hood. A man stretches, cloak falling from his shoulder, to reveal a patched tunic beneath. The garments are rough, patched, often stained, but they hold heat like a fortress. Everyone here knows that the only true enemy is cold, and fabric, however itchy, however worn, is the shield. Historians remain divided over the exact weave of these textiles. Some point to fine fragments found in graves, evidence of high craftsmanship. suggesting even ordinary people might have had softer garments than we imagine. Others caution that most surviving samples are from wealthy burials, not everyday wear, and that most people endured rougher, heavier cloth. You brush your hand along your sleeve again, wondering which version of history is true, coarse discomfort, or unexpected luxury hidden in the weave. The fire flickers, sending shadows across the colourful garments of the sleepers. You realize how personal these clothes are. Each tunic, cloak, and pair of leggings represents hours of spinning, weaving, dyeing, often the labour of women who worked by dim light to clothe their families. A mother's spindle provided the warmth now protecting her child. A wife's loom produced the cloak that shields her husband as he dreams. Even in sleep, you are wrapped in someone's care. The texture is unrelenting. Wool itches, linen softens, cloaks weigh heavy across your shoulders. But with every shift of the bench, with every sigh of the sleepers beside you, you feel the garments holding you together, keeping your heat close, linking your body to the rhythm of the hall. Without them, you would be one more frozen shape in the snow outside. With them, you are alive, cocooned in cloth and fur, cradled by the tireless labour of sheep, flax, and human hands. You turn onto your side, pulling the cloak close, and breathe deeply. The scent of wool fills your nose, the rough fabric presses against your skin, and the warmth lingers. In this moment, the scratchiness fades. All that remains is the quiet reassurance that, wrapped in wool and linen, you will see another dawn. The warmth of wool and hides settles around you, and for a while you almost drift, but then the night reminds you it is never silent. The Longhouse is alive with sounds, a mixture of comfort and irritation, of kin and beasts sharing the same fragile shelter. If you hoped for quiet rest, you quickly learn that sleep here is a negotiation with noise. It is well described in sagas and travellers' accounts that the Viking hall never truly slept. Even at night, the fire crackled, livestock shifted, and voices rose from restless dreamers. You listen now, letting the noises wash over you. Someone snores in a deep, uneven rhythm, loud enough to rattle the bench. Another person coughs a harsh, wet sound that lingers in the smoky air. Children whimper in their sleep, muttering half-formed words, soothed by the touch of a parent's hand. Something often overlooked is how the animals added their own chorus. Sheep bleat softly, goats rustle the straw, a cow stamps her hoof in irritation. Dogs, ever alert, snuffle in their dreams, sometimes barking at shadows only they can sense. If the wind changes, they grow restless, whining toward the door as if warning of spirits outside. To modern ears, it might seem unbearable, but to those who lived here, it was the normal music of winter nights. Researchers can't quite agree whether this noise was comforting or maddening. Some argue that people grew accustomed to it, lulled by the constant murmur into a different kind of sleep, shallow yet steady. Others suggest that constant disruption, snores, coughs, animals made deep rest rare, leaving people perpetually fatigued. You lie here, eyes half closed, wondering whether the Vikings awoke each morning refreshed or simply resigned to another day of weariness. You notice, too, the voice of the building itself. The timbers creak under pressure of the wind, moaning faintly like a ship at sea. Snow slides from the sod roof in muffled thumps. A gust squeezes through the seams in the wall, whistling faintly. Even the Longhouse speaks at night, reminding you that outside, the storm still prowls. Oddly enough, these layers of sound blend into rhythm after a while. The snore matches the creak, the cough follows the stamp of a hoof, the sigh of wind harmonizes with the crackle of coals. You begin to feel it as a kind of lullaby, harsh but strangely soothing. Alone, you might dread such noise. Together, in the safety of numbers, it becomes reassurance. The hall is full. The hall is alive. You are not facing the winter in silence. There is one detail you may not expect. Some sagas mention that during particularly long nights, people whispered to each other across the benches, trading gossip or telling short tales in hushed tones. In the dark, voices carried more easily, floating through the smoky haze like half-dreams. Imagine lying with your eyes closed, half asleep, listening to stories drifting around you, never knowing whether they were spoken to you or someone else. Perhaps some of those sagas that later became legend were first murmured as midnight chatter between restless sleepers. The smells mingle with the sounds. Smoke clings heavy, masking but not erasing the odor of manure, sweat, and damp wool. Every cough reminds you of the haze. Every creak underscores the fragility of the walls. Every sigh makes you more aware of your own breath. You lie still, caught in the symphony of survival, a concert no one asked for but everyone must attend. Archaeologists have found evidence that in some halls, straw was scattered on the floor and replaced regularly. At night, the rustling of straw under shifting animals and people must have been constant. You picture it now, the crunch of dry stalks under a cow's hoof, the whisper of straw as a child turns over in sleep. These tiny sounds add to the orchestra, subtle but ever present. And then comes the wind. Outside, the storm roars, battering against the turf walls. The sound is hollow, echoing, as if the whole world is filled with wolves howling at the edges of your safety. Inside, the timbers groan but hold. The contrast between the fury outside and the crowded noise within becomes stark. You are grateful for every cough, every snore, every bleat of a sheep, because they remind you are inside, not out in the white void. Still, it is not always peaceful. Quarrels sometimes broke out in the night. A nudge too sharp, a cloak tugged too far, a snore too loud. Frustration simmered quickly in such proximity. Some sagas record midnight scuffles, muttered insults, even daggers drawn in the heat of cramped resentment. You roll onto your side, careful not to elbow the sleeper beside you, suddenly aware of how easy it would be to disturb the fragile truce of the benches. But for now the rhythm holds. The sounds blur together, weaving a tapestry of survival. It is not silence, but it is continuity, each noise proof that life persists in the hall. You let your ears accept the chorus, the snore, the cough, the stamp, the sigh. Gradually the harsh edges soften, and your mind drifts. In the cacophony of the Longhouse, you discover a strange kind of peace, the peace of being one sound among many, folded into the nightly song of kin, animals, fire, and storm. Your eyes flutter open again, drawn by a faint glow dancing across the smoky rafters. The hearth has burned low, but small flames still leap now and then, casting shifting shapes along the walls. The Longhouse at night is never truly dark. Even when the fire dwindles, tallow candles or oil lamps sputter here and there, sending fragile shadows that glide like restless spirits over fur, timber, and faces. Contemporary sources describe how simple lighting was in these halls. Tallow candles made from rendered animal fat burned with a smoky flame, their smell acrid but familiar. Oil lamps, carved from soapstone, held fish oil or animal fat with a twisted bit of fibre as a wick. Neither gave much illumination, but in the long winter, even a faint glow was worth treasuring. You glance across the benches now and see the reflection of flame in someone's eyes, a sparkle half hidden by heavy lids. You might not expect this, but such lights were not always used for convenience. Some were lit as protection, a symbolic ward against the darkness pressing beyond the walls. In Norse belief, spirits roamed the long nights, and a guttering lamp at the edge of the hall might serve as a beacon, keeping wandering souls from stepping too close. The flicker of light was more than physical. It was psychological comfort against the endless winter night. There's still debate about how common these lamps and candles really were. Archaeologists find fragments often, yet disagree about whether every household used them nightly or whether they were luxuries reserved for wealthier farms. Some argue that for most families, the hearth alone was the only light. Its glow stretched thin across the benches. Others insist that lamps were widespread, each corner of the hall marked by a small flame. You watch the shadows sway now and wonder, was this hall wealthy enough to keep them burning, or is what you see tonight an exception rather than the rule? The play of shadow becomes hypnotic. A carved post, flickering in half-light, seems to move, its shape elongating, shrinking, bending. Faces become masks, transformed by flame into something mythic. You blink, uncertain whether you are staring at your kin or at something older, something carved from fire and imagination. The sagas tell of gods stepping into halls disguised, and you can see why. In this shifting glow, anyone could be more than human. A curious little fact is that children sometimes played with shadows, making shapes with their hands on the walls. It must have been one of the simplest entertainments. Yet here in the hall, where toys were scarce and nights long, a fluttering bird made by fingers could spark laughter. Perhaps that is what you glimpse now, small hands twisting in front of a lamp, casting silhouettes that ripple across the beams. You inhale, and the air tastes of smoke and fat, the residue of both fire and lamp. It is thick, and your eyes sting, but without light, the hall would dissolve into fear. Imagine waking in total blackness, unable to see the sleeper beside you, unable to find the fire's coals. A single spark of candle or lamp becomes salvation. You appreciate it all the more now, watching the glow soften the darkness into something almost gentle. Some scholars propose that light itself shaped the rhythm of Viking storytelling. By fire and lamp, sagas came alive, shadows acting as stage scenery for tales of gods and heroes. You can imagine a storyteller gesturing in the glow, his silhouette cast against the wall, his voice merging with the crackle of flame. The shadows themselves became characters, joining the hall in shared imagination. Perhaps tonight, even as you lie half asleep, stories are murmured somewhere nearby, their words carried to you by shadow and smoke. The flames tremble as a draught snakes through the walls. For a moment, the shadows shiver, stretching long fingers across your blanket of fur. Then the light steadies again, warm and steady, a fragile guardian in the dark. It is not bright enough to see clearly, but enough to remind you that you are not lost in emptiness. There is a floor beneath you, beams above, kin beside you. The light stitches you to this place. Oddly, the shadows offer privacy where none exists. With dozens of people crammed shoulder to shoulder, there is little space for solitude. Yet when the light flickers just right, it cloaks faces in darkness, blurs edges, lets you imagine you are unseen. You close your eyes and drift, comforted by the illusion that the shadows hide you, even as they bind you to the hall. And then, silence deepens. The candle burns lower, its flame shrinking to a trembling blue tongue before sputtering. For a heartbeat, you wonder if darkness will swallow everything. But the hearth glows faintly still, coals breathing with their own light. You feel reassured, though faint. The glow is eternal. It may dim, but it never dies. As you curl into your cloak, shadows continue to sway, their patterns etched into your mind even with eyes shut. You feel them linger, a dance of light and dark that belongs to every winter night in the Longhouse. The flames protect, the shadows whisper, and together they keep you company until sleep claims you again. You stir slightly, adjusting your cloak as the night lengthens. Around you, the hall is settling into its final rhythms of rest. Yet before true sleep takes hold, there is always a quiet interlude, those last small rituals that mark the passage from waking to dreaming. No matter how harsh the season, people still found ways to close their days with a measure of meaning, whether through prayer, gossip, or one last sip of ale. Archaeological evidence suggests that many Viking households ended their evenings with food or drink shared communally at the hearth. The final ladle of stew might be passed around, or a jug of ale drained among family members. These moments were practical, no one wished to sleep hungry, but they also carried a ritual weight. Eating together reaffirmed bonds before everyone surrendered to the vulnerability of sleep. Tonight, you watch as a woman pours the last of the ale into wooden cups, handing them to her kin with a quiet smile. The golden liquid catches the firelight, glimmering like a promise of warmth against the cold outside. An overlooked custom is the whisper of prayer to the old gods before bed. Some may have murmured invocations to Thor for protection, or to Freya for fertility and safe dreams. Others traced small signs on wooden beams, symbols of warding carved into the house itself. You picture a man leaning close to a carved post, his fingers tracing the rune for strength, muttering words too soft for others to hear. Even in the communal press of the hall, there was room for private devotion. Specialists disagree about how deeply Christian practices had woven into these nightly habits by the later Viking age. Some households might have ended with the sign of the cross, others with an offering to Odin, and perhaps many blended both, hedging their bets between old traditions and new faith. You imagine lying between sleepers who mutter different prayers, their words mingling in the smoky air, rising together through the rafters like one mixed offering. And then there is the gossip, the quiet, almost conspiratorial chatter that slips out when the lamps burn low. Even in the most practical of societies, people needed to share whispers before drifting into sleep. A woman might lean toward her neighbor, murmuring about the coming lambing season. A man might boast of a trade deal, his voice low but eager. Children giggle until hushed, trying to stifle laughter that would draw scolding. You hear it now, soft voices threading through the dark, half intelligible, like another kind of lullaby. One odd little practice occasionally recorded is the sharing of riddles or short verse at bedtime. Vikings loved wordplay, and even in the long dark, their minds turned to challenge. Imagine lying shoulder to shoulder, barely able to see, while a voice across the hall calls out a riddle. What grows without root, moves without foot, and kills without sword? The answer, of course, is frost. The game might spark chuckles, then fade into silence as drowsiness pulled everyone under. The ale adds its own weight. After a day of labour, of chopping wood, tending livestock, or enduring bitter winds, a cup of fermented barley was more than refreshment, it was medicine. Its warmth spread through the body, loosening muscles and quieting worries. Tonight, as you sip the last mouthful, you feel your limbs grow heavier, your eyelids slower. The sour sweet taste lingers on your tongue, a reminder that even small comforts mattered in winters this long. There's another layer to these rituals, the simple acts of checking on each other. A mother tucks her child closer beneath the furs. A man pats the flank of the cow tethered nearby, murmuring to calm her. A young thrall quietly banks the fire with fresh logs, ensuring embers will glow until morning. These gestures may seem small, but they knit the hall together, reinforcing trust in a world where trust was survival. Historians are not unanimous about how structured these rituals were. Some argue they were instinctive, born from habit rather than formal custom. Others suggest they carried cultural weight, that everyone knew the sequence: food, prayer, stories, ale, fire. Whichever view is true, you feel the rhythm tonight as it unfolds naturally. The hall breathes, each sleeper preparing in their own way, yet all bound by the same unseen pattern. The air grows thicker with fatigue. Voices taper, laughter fades, and the clatter of cups falls silent. A child whines once more, then is soothed. The cow shifts in straw, then settles. The last candle sputters, its flame leaning sideways before recovering, and through it all the coals glow steadily, red eyes watching the household with their own quiet vigilance. You roll onto your side, pulling your cloak closer, the warmth of ale still in your belly. The last whispers drift into silence, replaced by the steady chorus of breath. These small rituals have done their work. They have bound you to the hall, to your kin, to the unseen forces beyond the walls. Now, at last, true sleep can begin. You stir slightly, nudged by a soft movement at your side. When you open your eyes, you see the smallest of sleepers tucked between adults, their tiny faces pressed into wool and fur. Children in the Longhouse do not sleep separately. They are woven directly into the warmest heart of the family. Their presence is not only cherished but vital, for their fragile bodies cannot withstand the cold of the bench's edges. It's well documented through sagas and burial finds that children were sheltered at night in the innermost spaces, nestled between parents or grandparents. The reasoning was both emotional and practical. A child placed against the outside wall might not wake in the morning. A child pressed close between warm adults had a much better chance of seeing spring. Tonight, you watch a mother drape her cloak across two little ones, her own body curling protectively around them like a shield. Something that may surprise you is how swaddling continued long after infancy. Babies were wrapped tightly in cloth or fur bundles, like small cocoons, and then tucked directly against an adult's chest. The bundle prevented wandering in the night and preserved every scrap of heat. You imagine the sensation of waking to find a warm, wriggling weight in your arms, the child's tiny breath mingling with your own. Scholars remain divided on whether children had distinct sleeping spaces once they grew older. Some believe benches were loosely divided by family units, giving each household cluster its own portion of space. Others argue children continued to sleep intermingled among all adults, their presence scattered through the hall like threads in a tapestry. Either way, the evidence suggests they were never far from the protective circle of adults. You see it now, small figures nestled in every crevice, like embers banked against the cold. The sounds of children add another layer to the hall's nighttime symphony. A whimper rises, followed by the low murmur of a lullaby. The melody is simple, repetitive, perhaps nothing more than a hum, yet it calms the child instantly. Another child coughs, the rasp sharp against the smoky air. A third mutters nonsense in a dream, causing a ripple of quiet laughter from the adults nearby. These small interruptions are accepted as part of the fabric of sleep. No one expects silence when little ones are near. An offbeat detail worth noticing is that children were often given tiny amulets for protection, sometimes Thor's hammers carved from bone or amber. Imagine a child clutching such a charm, even in sleep, the small pendant pressed into their palm as reassurance against sickness or spirits. In the smoky dark, those charms were as important as cloaks or furs. The atmosphere of care is palpable. You watch as an elder stretches out an arm to draw a child closer, even while half asleep. A sister pulls straw beneath her younger brother to soften his spot. A father rolls onto his side, so his body forms a barrier between his children and the draught creeping from the wall. These gestures are instinctive, constant. In the Viking hall, every child is protected not only by parents but by the collective watchfulness of the community. Of course, historians also caution us not to romanticize. Infant mortality in the Viking Age was high, and the smoky, crowded Longhouse could not have been an easy place for fragile lungs. Some argue that the very arrangement meant to protect children may have endangered them, with coughs and fevers spreading quickly through families. Yet others point out that without this closeness, far fewer would have survived the brutal winters. You lie there, listening to a child's breathing steady as she drifts back to sleep, and sense the truth in both arguments. Children brought something else to the hall, liveliness even in the night. If one awoke in the dark and asked for a story, it might ripple through the benches, leading to quiet murmurs of myth or saga. If a child burst suddenly into laughter, it softened the edge of hardship for everyone listening. Their presence was a constant reminder of renewal, of life continuing in spite of winter's cruelty. You think, too, of the practical lessons woven into these nightly arrangements. A child sleeping close to adults learned early how the hall functioned. The cough of a grandfather, the shift of a thrall rising to tend the fire, the way animals shuffled in straw. Even in sleep, knowledge seeped into their minds the sounds, smells, and rhythms of communal life. The flicker of firelight plays across one small face now, highlighting the curve of a cheek, the damp strands of hair stuck to skin. The child stirs, snuggles deeper into her mother's cloak, and sighs. The sound is so soft it nearly disappears into the hall's larger rhythm, but it lingers with you. This, more than the fire or the furs, feels like the true heart of the Longhouse, the fragile, stubborn insistence of life protected by every adult around it. You curl back into your bedding, the warmth of kin pressing close, the breath of children mingling with your own. The hall groans, the animals stir, the smoke thickens. But the presence of little ones transforms it all, turning survival into something more than endurance. It becomes hope, whispered in lullabies, carried in tiny breaths through the long winter night. The hush after the children's murmurs fades, and for a moment it seems as though silence might finally claim the hall. But then a voice rises, low and steady, from one of the benches near the hearth. Another voice joins in, and soon the smoky air fills not with chatter or argument, but with story. This is how many Viking knights slipped into sleep through the gentle current of tales. Archaeological finds and literary records alike remind us that sagas were not merely written later. They lived first in voices, recited aloud in the dark. By lamplight or fireglow, men and women wove epics of gods, heroes, and ancestors. Stories so ingrained in memory, they became part of nightly routine. Tonight, you hear such a voice. A man speaking of Thor's hammer striking lightning, his words punctuated by the crackle of fire. The children stir, eyes half open, lulled back into dreams by the rhythm of sound. Something unusual to note is that storytelling was not confined to professional skalds. In the intimacy of the Longhouse, anyone might take up the thread. A grandmother could recount a tale of her youth. A boy might proudly repeat a verse he had learned. A woman could share a myth she heard from her mother. The stories themselves mattered, but so did the act of sharing. In a hall filled with smoke, furs, and fatigue, words became another kind of warmth. There's no clear consensus among historians on whether every hall told sagas nightly or whether it was reserved for special gatherings. Some believe it was constant, a nightly rhythm as essential as tending the fire. Others argue that long days of labor left little energy for more than murmured prayers. Yet here, lying amid the furs, you feel the truth. Even one story, told softly before sleep, carries more weight than silence. The shadows dance with the words. As the storyteller speaks of a sea voyage, you can almost feel the ship sway. As he recalls a frost giant looming, the crack of timber in the storm outside echoes the tale. Imagination and environment blur. You understand why these stories endured. They weren't abstract myths, but living, breathing companions, stitched into the very fabric of winter nights. An odd little detail survives in a few accounts. Riddles and kennings sometimes slipped into these sagas, challenges that tested wit as much as memory. A boy might interrupt with a clever question, earning laughter and praise before being hushed to sleep. In this way, storytelling was more than entertainment. It was education, a rehearsal for memory and language. Each night became a classroom lit by fire and shadow. The air seems warmer as words flow. People draw closer, not just for heat but for meaning. The sagas remind them who they are, descendants of gods, kin of warriors, bound by tales older than the hall itself. A thrall listens quietly, perhaps hearing the same stories from the bench's edge, and for a moment even he belongs to the myth. Storytelling in the Longhouse was an act of inclusion as much as survival. You close your eyes and let the words wash over you. The cadence is steady, half chant, half lullaby. The smoke no longer stings as sharply. The coughs fade to the edges of perception. You drift between waking and dreaming, carried by the voice. You see Thor striding across the sky, hear the splash of oars, feel the bite of northern winds. And then, in an instant, you are back lying on a bench, shoulder pressed against your kin, fur tucked around your body. Scholars still puzzle over how much of the sagas we know today resemble what was told in these smoky halls. Were the tales polished over generations, or did improvisation shape them nightly? Did the stories grow grander in retelling, or did they shrink to fragments whispered in exhaustion? You cannot know, but you feel their power, enough to understand why they survived centuries of winter. A curious sensation creeps in. You realize your dreams are blending with the stories. The line between spoken saga and personal vision dissolves. Perhaps this is how myth was born, not only told but lived in half-sleep, where words became dreams and dreams became memory. In that liminal space, gods stepped closer, giants roamed more vividly, and ancestors spoke more clearly. The voice softens, trailing off into silence. A moment lingers, as though the words still echo in the rafters. Then a cough, a sigh, a shuffle of straw. Sleep reclaims the hall. The saga has done its work, carrying everyone a little further into slumber, binding them tighter to one another and to their own past. You exhale, eyelids heavy, still hearing faint fragments of the tale in your mind. The longhouse creaks, the animals shift, but the story lingers like embers. You are part of it now, folded into the same current of myth and memory that carried your Viking hosts through countless winters. And as your thoughts dissolve into dreams, you realize the sagas are not gone, they are alive, flickering in every breath of smoke and shadow, waiting to whisper you deeper into sleep. Your dreams come thick and strange after the sagas fade. You roll onto your back, staring into the haze above the hearth, and realize how blurred the boundary feels between story and sleep. For the Vikings, this twilight state was not just idle wandering of the mind. Dreams carried weight, meaning, and sometimes fear. To them, the visions of the night could be as real as any oath spoken by day. It is well attested in saga literature that dreams were often treated as messages, warnings of future battles, omens of death, or glimpses of fortune yet to come. A warrior might wake, claiming he had seen Odin in the smoke, or a woman might murmur of a dream in which wolves tore at the fences, interpreted as enemies approaching the farm. Tonight, as you lie half awake in the Longhouse, you can imagine a sleeper bolting upright, whispering a dream to his kin before dawn erases it. Something unexpected is that not every dream was taken so gravely. Some were playful, believed to come from trickster spirits or restless ancestors teasing the living. A dream of flying might draw laughter, while a dream of losing one's cloak could be retold as a comic tale the next day. Even in hardship, humor found its place in the smoky dark. You picture children describing fantastical visions to their mothers, the stories earning both amusement and suspicion. Researchers remain divided on how systematically dreams were interpreted. Some argue that specialized seers or wise women held authority in explaining them, their words guiding decisions in war or trade. Others suggest that dream interpretation was more communal, shared in whispers over breakfast as families debated meaning. Perhaps both are true grand visions brought to seers, smaller ones discussed over the morning fire. You can almost hear it. "I dreamed the roof cracked open," one man says. "It means we should mend the beams," another replies, while a third mutters, "No, it's a sign of storm." The Longhouse itself feeds the dreamlike state. With smoke heavy in your lungs, warmth and cold wrestling across your skin, and the chorus of sleepers and animals all around, it is easy to feel half in this world and half in another. No wonder dreams were potent here. The hall itself seems a doorway between realms. You drift again, half conscious, and see shadows stretch into shapes, giants, wolves, even ships on phantom seas. You blink, and they shrink back to timber and smoke. But for a heartbeat, you cannot be sure. An odd little belief recorded in later folklore is that dreams could wander from person to person. If you dreamed of someone, it meant part of your spirit had visited them. In the tight quarters of the Longhouse, such ideas must have carried extra weight. Imagine waking and telling your brother, "I visited you last night," and having him nod solemnly, half believing it true. In a place where bodies press together in sleep, perhaps souls pressed close as well. The air grows thicker, and the coals cast only a dim red glow. This is the hour when dreams feel most vivid, when silence is broken only by murmurs of sleepers. You catch fragments, a man muttering angrily, a child giggling in her sleep, a woman sighing deeply. Each dream has its own voice, spilling into the shared air. The hall becomes a chorus not just of breath, but of half-spoken visions. Historians argue over whether Viking attitudes toward dreams were fatalistic, believing them fixed messages of the future, or flexible, open to interpretation. Some sagas show warriors resigned to dream omens of death, marching toward battle as though fate was sealed. Others depict people seeking to outwit bad dreams, changing plans or making offerings to sway fortune. You turn on your side, furs rustling, and wonder which feels truer. Are these dreams prophecy, or simply smoke of the mind? Your own half-dream blurs again. You see the roof beams above you curve like the ribs of a whale. You hear distant howls beyond the walls, merging with the snore of a man nearby. You feel the weight of fur and wool pressing you downward, as though the earth itself is drawing you into its depths. It is unsettling, yet strangely comforting, as if you are being folded into the Longhouse's embrace, made part of its living dream. A soft cry breaks the vision. One of the children stirs, whispering of a nightmare. The mother soothes her quickly, stroking her hair, murmuring words that blend prayer with reassurance. The rest of the hall barely stirs. Nightmares are expected, part of life when stories of monsters and gods are whispered nightly into smoky air. But the care given in the moment transforms fear into calm. Soon, the child's breathing steadies again, returning to the rhythm of the hall. You exhale slowly, aware of your own drifting mind. The line between waking and dreaming has thinned until it nearly disappears. Around you, every sleeper is walking their own path through visions, some fearful, some wondrous, all believed to mean something. And you too are part of this web, your thoughts carried upward with the smoke, mingling with theirs, woven into the tapestry of the night. The Longhouse creaks once more. You close your eyes, letting dreams take you, knowing that when dawn comes, the visions will be remembered, argued over, or forgotten. For now, though, they belong entirely to the night, drifting like smoke through the rafters, whispering to each soul as winter holds the hall in its grasp. You wake again, though you're not sure if you ever fully slept. The air in the hall is heavy, but your body feels heavier still. There is a peculiar weight pressing on every muscle, not only from the thick cloaks and hides, but from the season itself. Winter shapes more than the nights, it shapes the body's rhythm, slowing everything down until rest becomes the default state of existence. It is well established that in northern latitudes, the scarcity of daylight dictated the pace of life. The sun rose late, lingered briefly, and slipped away far too soon. For the Vikings, this meant long hours indoors, punctuated only by small windows of outdoor work. Winter was not a time for expansion, but for conservation. You sense it now, an inertia in the hall, a collective drowsiness that has nothing to do with fatigue from labor and everything to do with the season itself. Something curious is that some scholars have proposed the Vikings may have slept in segmented patterns, 2 or even 3 distinct bouts of rest, broken by periods of wakefulness in the middle of the night. During these intervals, people might tend the fire, whisper stories, or simply lie awake reflecting. You notice it here. The hall is not fully asleep. Some stir, rise briefly, then lie down again. Sleep is not a straight line, but a series of waves, ebbing and flowing with the firelight. There is still debate over how intentional this rhythm was. Did people consciously treat the night as divided, or did the pattern emerge naturally from the long darkness? Some historians argue it was simply necessity, too many hours of darkness to sleep straight through. Others suggest it was cultural, a learned cycle of segmented rest that suited the winter months. You lie in the half-dreaming quiet now, and realize both could be true. The fatigue is different here. Your limbs are not exhausted from overwork. They are simply heavy with season. With so little sunlight, bodies crave stillness. You feel it as you shift under the furs, each movement sluggish, as though your blood itself has slowed. Around you, others breathe deeply, not in desperate sleep, but in the drawn-out rest of winter's embrace. A lesser-known detail is how diet reinforced this heaviness. Meals in winter were heavy on salted meat, dried fish, grains, and ale foods that filled the stomach, but did not energize in the same way as summer's fresh produce. After a bowl of barley porridge, or a cut of fatty pork, the body leaned naturally toward drowsiness. You imagine finishing a late stew, and then immediately curling beneath hides. not out of indulgence but because your body demanded it. The hall itself becomes a womb of lethargy. Fire warms just enough to relax, not enough to invigorate. Smoke lulls rather than sharpens. Even the animals contribute, their steady breaths like a chorus of sleep-inducing sighs. It is no wonder that winter sagas so often describe endless nights, a blurring of time when day and night lose their boundaries. You glance toward the small roof hole, wondering if dawn has come, and realize it scarcely matters. In winter, time belongs to the hall, not the Sunday. Some academics argue that this deep seasonal rest may have been beneficial, conserving strength for spring when labor returned in earnest. Others caution it may have bred melancholy, a heaviness of spirit alongside the body. You sense both possibilities. Lying here, wrapped in furs, your body welcomes the rest, yet your mind wanders restlessly. How many winters could you endure like this before longing consumed you? The rhythm of breath becomes hypnotic. You hear your neighbors' steady inhale and exhale, the rise and fall of chests along the benches, the occasional sigh or murmur. Each sound feeds into the sense of collective slumber. Alone it might feel oppressive. Together it feels inevitable, as though the hall itself breathes for everyone inside. Something offbeat yet fascinating. Sagas occasionally describe dream journeys or visions experienced during long winters, moments where heroes claim to wander other realms while their bodies lay dormant. Perhaps these stories reflect the strange quality of seasonal fatigue, where waking and dreaming intertwine. You feel a sliver of that now, drifting in and out of awareness, half convinced the creak of the timbers above you is the voice of something otherworldly. The fatigue has a texture. It is not sharp, not restless, but deep and soft, like wool draped over the mind. Your muscles slacken, your breathing slows, your thoughts blur. Even when your eyes open, they feel heavy, reluctant to face the dimness. You imagine whole families passing weeks in this state, rising only to eat, tend animals, or stoke the fire, then slipping back into slumber. It is not laziness, it is survival, a hibernation of sorts that mirrors the animals they kept. You roll onto your back again, staring into the haze of smoke, and accept the drowsiness. The season itself insists upon it. Winter in the Viking world is not merely endured, it is yielded to. You give in as they did, letting fatigue wrap around you like a second cloak. The fire hisses, the animals breathe, the hall groans, and you close your eyes once more, surrendering to the endless night. The heaviness of winter sleep wraps around you, but even as you drift, you notice a peculiar truth. Warmth is not only the gift of fire and hides, but of the very bodies surrounding you. In the Viking Longhouse, heat was measured not in degrees but in people. Every extra sleeper was another ember added to the living furnace of the hall. Archaeological reconstructions confirm that longhouses could stretch 40, 50, even 60 feet in length, with benches running along either side. Picture dozens of bodies lined shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in cloaks and hides, pressed close enough that the warmth of one chest bled into the next. Alone, you might shiver all night. Together, you form a chain of heat, each person part of the other's survival. What you might not expect is that animals contributed just as much to this equation of warmth. Cows, goats, sheep, and dogs all radiated heat, their breath fogging in the smoky air. Farmers knew instinctively that a barn full of beasts was warmer than an empty one. The Longhouse simply folded this truth into its very design, creating a shared space where heat flowed freely between human and animal alike. Tonight, as you lie beneath your fur, you feel the faint glow not just from the fire, but from every living creature inside. Scholars remain divided on how effective this communal warmth truly was. Some argue that with enough bodies, the hall might hover comfortably above freezing, a triumph in such brutal winters. Others caution that drafts and poor insulation kept the interior cold, and that body heat only took the edge off misery. You shift, feeling the chill still clinging to your feet, and wonder which version feels truer. Perhaps both. A fragile comfort that could tip easily back into discomfort. Still, you sense the mathematics of warmth. Each sleeper adds something, a degree here, a fraction there. Children snuggled between parents glow like coals banked in a hearth. Dogs curled at the foot of the bench are furry heaters, loyal and silent. A cow tethered nearby radiates like a stove, her steady bulk exhaling heat with every sigh. Together, it creates a climate the outside world could never offer. A curious observation made by some historians is that this closeness may have altered social behavior. Hospitality was not just courtesy, but a survival tactic. The more bodies in the hall, the warmer the night. A guest was another contributor to heat, another shield against frost. Imagine arriving weary from travel, and instead of being turned away, you are welcomed precisely because your breath and body will help keep the household alive until morning. Oddly enough, warmth itself could reveal hierarchy. The honored guest or head of household slept nearer the fire, where radiant heat was strongest. Thralls or outsiders were pushed to the periphery, where drafts crept in. In this way, temperature itself reflected social rank. You might lie warm near the hearth or shiver at the wall, and both placements spoke volumes about your standing in the community. You breathe deeply now, aware of how collective this survival is. Your neighbor's shoulder presses against yours, radiating faint heat. You shift your leg and feel the warmth of another body brushing back. The closeness might feel suffocating in summer, but in winter it is salvation. Privacy dissolves, heat replaces it. There's an offbeat detail worth imagining. Sometimes people slept with their dogs not just near their feet, but under the same furs. A dog's body, smaller but constant, made an excellent bedfellow. You can almost feel the weight of a hound curled against your legs, its warmth seeping into your bones, its steady breathing another reassurance in the smoky dark. The logic of warmth shaped even the rhythm of night. When someone rose to tend the fire or check the animals, their absence was felt instantly a gap in the chain, a pocket of cold spreading until they returned. You sense it as someone shifts away now, leaving you briefly exposed. The chill creeps in, sharp and unwelcome, until their body settles back and heat flows once again into your side. Debates among historians continue about whether this reliance on communal warmth created a stronger sense of kinship or bred resentment at the lack of space. Was the Longhouse a cradle of unity, each person bound to the others by survival? Or was it a place of grudging endurance, where warmth was traded for freedom? Perhaps both answers hold some truth, depending on the household, the night, the storm outside. You tug your cloak closer, reflecting on how different this is from modern life. Today, you might flick a switch, adjust a thermostat, sleep in solitude. Here, warmth is earned collectively, through bodies pressed close, through animals tethered nearby, through fire constantly fed. It is fragile, fleeting, but it is enough. The hall exhales with you, dozens of chests rising and falling together, dozens of heartbeats thrumming warmth into the smoky air. You close your eyes, sinking deeper into the human hearth you have become part of. The mathematics of survival is simple here. One fire, many bodies, one hall, one night endured. And you, lying among them, are one more ember in the living flame of winter. You stir against the hides, scratching absently at your wrist, and then at your neck. At first you think it is nothing, just the itch of wool, or the prickle of reindeer fur shedding under your cloak. But the sensation lingers, crawling slowly over your skin. You know the truth before you even lift the fur edge. You are not alone beneath these blankets. In the Viking Longhouse, no sleeper ever truly was. Archaeological finds and literary sources confirm what your itching makes clear. Lice and fleas were nightly companions. Combs carved from bone, found in graves and settlements across Scandinavia, show grooves darkened with microscopic remains of these pests. Vikings carried their grooming tools everywhere, not out of vanity but of necessity. Even so, no amount of combing could entirely banish the crawling multitudes from bedding and clothes. What you might not expect is that parasites weren't confined to humans. Animals tethered inside brought their own hosts. Fleas nestled in sheep's wool, lice crawling across dogs, ticks hidden in cattle hair. The Longhouse was a perfect storm of warmth, moisture, and flesh. You imagine an invisible tide rising each night, an army of tiny creatures feasting unnoticed as bodies press together in sleep. Researchers are not of one mind about how much this plagued everyday life. Some argue that constant exposure bred tolerance, that people grew used to the itching and scratching, dismissing it as background noise of survival. Others insist infestations must have been severe, adding misery to already difficult winters. Tonight, as you scratch at your collarbone, you suspect the truth lay somewhere in between, an irritation tolerated because there was no choice. An odd but telling tidbit is that some sagas use lice metaphorically, comparing armies swarming across a battlefield to lice creeping over a tunic. The imagery made sense precisely because every listener knew the feeling intimately. To describe an enemy as lice was not just poetic, it was visceral, unforgettable. You shiver, suddenly aware of how common this sensation was, how shared among everyone in the hall. The itch pulls you further awake. You listen and realize others are shifting too, scratching under hides, murmuring softly. It is not loud, not disruptive, but part of the night's rhythm, as ordinary as coughing or snoring. In the dark, no one complains. Complaints change nothing. Instead, you hear the faint scrape of bone combs at dawn, when sleepers sit up and run teeth through their hair, shaking out the pests into the straw below. A ritual as daily as feeding the fire. The smell of the hall carries its own reminder. The musk of animals, the dampness of hides, the sweat of bodies, all of it feeds the parasite's paradise. No matter how many times furs are beaten outside or how often tunics are brushed, the creatures return. You scratch again and remind yourself, survival is not comfortable, it is persistent. Historians still argue about whether Vikings burned bedding periodically to purge infestations. Some evidence suggests hides were smoked or treated with herbs. Others see little sign of such practices, concluding that people simply endured. You wonder if certain families guarded small tricks, hanging furs nearer to the smoke, rubbing oils into skin to lessen the torment. Small comforts in a world where perfection was impossible. The itch has a strange effect. It keeps you from slipping entirely into deep sleep, pulling you into that restless state between waking and dreaming. Perhaps this too shaped the culture of the hall. If nights were fractured by scratching, by combing, by murmurs of irritation, then people learned to accept segmented sleep as natural. You scratch again, and as your nails drag across your skin, you realize how much of Viking endurance lay in the ability to live with such constant, minor discomforts. And yet, this misery was shared. Every sleeper, high-born or low, felt the same bite. A chieftain's cloak might gleam with imported dyes, but beneath it, fleas still thrived. A thrall's tunic might be coarse, but his skin crawled with the same parasites as his master's. In the smoky dark, equality was not proclaimed in words, but in the scratching of nails against skin. You shift onto your side, trying to find relief, pressing close to your neighbor for warmth even as the itching continues. Around you, bodies rustle, sigh, and scratch. The fire hisses, a cow stamps, a child whimpers and is soothed. Life goes on. The hall breathes, pests and all. It dawns on you that this too is part of survival. Not just the fire, not just the hides, not just the communal warmth. Survival is endurance of imperfection, the acceptance that to live is to itch, to scratch, to share your body with the unseen. You exhale, pulling the cloak closer, letting the irritation fade into background, and once more allow yourself to drift. For if the Vikings could endure centuries of such nights, so too can you endure a single one. The parasites creep, the sleepers sigh, the hall groans. And still, beneath the furs, within the smoke, life continues, stubborn and unbroken. You jolt awake, though you don't know why. The hall is darker now, the fire a bed of glowing coals more than flames, and for a moment the cold pricks sharper at your skin. Then you hear it a rustle, the scrape of a bench, the soft thud of footsteps moving near the hearth. Not everyone sleeps the night through. Someone always wakes, always stirs, to tend the fire, to guard the hall. This is the midnight watch. Archaeological reconstructions and sagas alike point to the necessity of keeping the hearth alive. A fire left unattended could sputter into darkness, leaving the hall cold and vulnerable. So families rotated responsibility. A son, a servant, or sometimes even the matriarch herself would rise in the deep of night, pull on a cloak, and nudge the coals back to life. Tonight you watch as a man kneels by the hearth, blowing gently until sparks flare and flames lick upward once again. Something easily overlooked is that this duty was more than practical. It was ritual. The fire was not only heat, it was the hall's heart. To let it die entirely was seen by some as courting misfortune, a sign of neglect that could invite spirits or bad luck. So the midnight watch carried weight beyond survival. You imagine the man whispering softly as he works, half prayer, half reassurance, speaking to the fire as though it were alive. Scholars continue to debate how formal this rotation of watchers was. Some suggest strict patterns, each household member taking a turn, almost like a guard post. Others argue it was looser, with whoever awoke naturally tending the fire. The evidence is inconclusive, but the truth you sense now is that someone always rose because instinct itself demanded it. No one could fully rest, knowing the coals might fade. The watchman moves quietly, but his presence changes the hall. Shadows stir as the flames brighten, revealing faces slack with sleep, furs heaped in uneven piles, a child's hand resting open on a cloak. The animals react too, lifting their heads at the sudden shift in light before settling back again. The watcher is both intruder and protector, breaking the stillness to ensure it continues. An odd but fascinating tidbit. Some sagas hint that those who kept the midnight fire also told stories to themselves, whispering verses or chanting charms. Alone in the hush, with only the crackle of flames for company, perhaps the mind sought distraction. You can picture it, the watchman muttering lines of poetry, keeping rhythm with the snap of the coals, weaving his own private saga into the smoky dark. The role is not without unease. Rising at night means facing the draught creeping through the door, the eerie silence punctuated by the howls outside. You shiver, hearing faint echoes beyond the turf walls. The wolves are out there, circling in the dark, and though they cannot breach the hall, their voices remind you of the fragility of your safety. For the watchman, every shift of wind, every creak of timber, carries the weight of possibility. Danger or just the night breathing? Only vigilance decides. You watch him add logs carefully, balancing them so they burn slowly. The flame leaps higher, shadows recoil, and warmth spreads outward once again. He stirs the ash with a stick, exposing glowing embers that had hidden beneath the grey. A small cloud of sparks rises, swirling like orange insects before vanishing into smoke. It is oddly beautiful, this act of maintenance, ordinary yet essential, like a heartbeat steadied by a gentle hand. Historians argue about whether Viking fires burned high through the night or were deliberately damped to conserve wood. Some believe that only embers were kept alive, banked under ash until morning. Others think the fire was revived periodically, keeping light and heat constant. Tonight you see both approaches. The flame rises just enough to reassure, then is allowed to shrink back into coals, a compromise between warmth and economy. The watchman sits for a moment longer, cloak wrapped tight, staring into the flames. Perhaps he is thinking of tomorrow's work, or perhaps of gods and ancestors. Fire has always been a bridge between worlds, and in the lonely silence of night, it feels even more so. You imagine him seeing omens in the sparks, listening for whispers in the crackle, sensing presences beyond the visible. The midnight watch may guard the hall, but it also opens a doorway in the mind. A peculiar comfort spreads through you as the warmth grows. Without the watchman, you would be shivering, huddled deeper into hides, your dreams troubled by cold. With him, the hall exhales again, the balance restored. You close your eyes briefly, listening to his movements, the shuffle of feet, the creak of a bench, the hiss of damp wood catching flame. These small sounds become lullabies, reminders that someone is awake so you can safely sleep. Eventually, he lies back down, his task complete. The hall settles once more into rhythm, the fire glowing, the sleepers breathing, the animals sighing. The wolves howl faintly outside, but their voices are less sharp now, muted by warmth and distance. You roll onto your side, furs pulled close, and let yourself drift again. For in the Longhouse, survival does not belong to one person alone. It belongs to all, each sleeper contributing warmth, each animal adding breath, each watchman tending fire. The midnight watch is just one link in that chain, a quiet assurance that even in the darkest hours, the hall's heart will keep beating until dawn. The fire has been fed, the embers glow steady, and for a time the hall feels secure. Yet outside the turf walls, the night is far from quiet. A sound cuts through the muffled breathing and crackling wood, a long rising howl that prickles your skin. It comes again, closer this time, and you realize that wolves roam the dark fields beyond the Longhouse. Archaeological evidence of wolf bones near Viking settlements suggests these predators were constant neighbors. They were feared for their hunger, respected for their cunning, and woven deeply into myth. In Norse lore, wolves devour the sun and moon during Ragnarok, plunging the world into darkness. To hear their howls in the night was to feel both practical fear and spiritual unease. Tonight, as you lie under the hides, you understand why those stories resonated. Something that might surprise you is how livestock reacted first. The tethered cow near the back of the hall lifts her head, ears twitching. A sheep bleats nervously, shifting in the straw. Animals sense danger before humans do, and their unease spreads. You hear a dog growl low, pressing its body against the bench where its master sleeps. These subtle responses remind you that even inside, the night presses close. There's no agreement among historians about how well longhouses protected livestock from wolves. Some believe the turf walls and human presence were deterrent enough, while others argue that attacks were frequent, especially on animals kept outside. Saga accounts of wolves stealing sheep support the latter. The truth may depend on season and circumstance, but the fear of wolves was real, shaping vigilance each night. The sound of the howl threads into your half-dreaming state. You imagine grey shapes circling in the snow, their eyes reflecting faint moonlight, their paws crunching over frozen ground. The storm muffles their movement, but their voices rise unimpeded, filling the night with eerie music. For the Vikings, these howls were reminders of nature's dominance. You might command a farm, but the wild was never far away. An odd little tidbit: wolf howls may have been interpreted not only as threats but as omens. Some communities believed a chorus of wolves foreshadowed shifts in fortune, from battles lost to hunts that would fail. The ambiguity made the sound all the more haunting. Was it simply hunger at work, or were the gods sending a message through the voices of beasts? You pull the cloak tighter and wonder which answer the hall's sleepers might have chosen. The dogs inside bristle, their ears sharp, their growls low. One lets out a sharp bark, answered by a muffled shushing from a drowsy voice. Yet the bark matters, it is defiance. A line drawn between hearth and wilderness. You realize the dogs are not only companions but guardians, sounding the alarm against threats that lurk just beyond the firelight. Their bodies radiate warmth, their voices radiate warning. You listen closer. The wolves are not constant, they cry, then fall silent, then rise again. The silence is almost worse, leaving you wondering where they are, whether they creep closer to the walls. The turf, roof, and timber beams feel sturdy, but your imagination betrays you, picturing claws scratching at the door, teeth worrying at the straw. You know the wolves cannot breach so easily, yet fear makes the images vivid. Historians still debate how often wolves attacked humans directly. Some argue it was rare, that wolves preferred sheep and goats. Others cite folklore suggesting children and the weak were vulnerable. Perhaps the truth lies in scarcity when winters were harshest and food scarce. Wolves might take risks they otherwise avoided. You think of tonight's storm, of the endless dark, and wonder whether desperation prowls with them now. The howl comes again, so close you imagine it, echoing just outside the door. Sleepers stir uneasily, pulling furs tighter. A child whimpers, and her mother whispers comfort. The hall does not panic, this is routine. Expected. But tension hums through the sleepers like a low string, vibrating quietly beneath the sound of breath. Yet the fear has a strange companion, reassurance. The very fact that you hear wolves means the walls are holding. You are inside, not out there. The Longhouse was built for this, to turn predator songs into background noise, to transform fear into drowsy acceptance. You close your eyes again, letting the sound become part of the night's rhythm, no different from snoring or coughing. A curious reflection arises. In a world where danger pressed so close, perhaps fear itself became a lullaby. The howls reminded sleepers of their fragility, but also of their safety. Wrapped in hides, pressed against kin, you could surrender to sleep knowing that your community had crafted a barrier strong enough to hold the wild at bay. The wolves cry once more, voices rising together, eerie and haunting, then fading into distance. The dogs sigh, settling back. The cow shifts but does not rise. The hall exhales again, its rhythm restored. You, too, exhale, pulling the cloak tighter, comforted strangely by the reminder that danger lurks outside, but cannot cross the threshold. Not tonight. And so, as wolves sing in the snowy dark, you sink deeper into warmth, into smoke, into the breathing cocoon of the Longhouse. Their voices follow you into dreams, but no longer as threat, now as music, the anthem of a world outside that you will face again only when dawn returns. The wolf's song drifts into silence, but another warmth begins to spread through you, a different kind than that of the fire or the furs. It lies heavy in your belly, tingling through your limbs, softening your mind. Ale. Earlier in the evening, cups were passed around, and though the portions may have been modest, the fermented brew works its magic slowly. You realize now how important this simple drink was in shaping sleep within the Longhouse. It's well documented that ale was a daily staple of Viking life. Brewed from barley or rye, sometimes sweetened with honey, it was consumed by nearly everyone, including children in weaker forms. Water was often unsafe, and ale, with its mild alcohol content, provided hydration as well as calories. By night, after a long day of labor and cold, ale carried a different purpose. It softened the edges of exhaustion, relaxed tense muscles, and made the endless hours of winter darkness easier to surrender to. Something that might surprise you is how variable ale was from hall to hall. Some brews were thin and sour, barely stronger than modern beer. Others were thick, almost porridge-like, consumed with spoons as much as with cups. Special feasts featured stronger mead, honey-sweet and far more intoxicating. But even humble ale had enough effect to lull weary villagers towards slumber. You can taste it still on your tongue. Yeasty, earthy, faintly bitter. There's no scholarly agreement on how much alcohol Vikings consumed daily. Some argue that ale was weak enough to be drunk in large quantities without much intoxication. Others claim it was potent enough that nightly cups left people drowsy, or even stumbling. Tonight, you feel the latter in your bones, warmth suffusing your limbs, thoughts drifting with unusual softness. The hall breathes slower, heavier, as ale thickens the air with collective drowsiness. The ritual of drinking also reinforced community. Sharing a final cup before sleep was more than refreshment, it was a reaffirmation of bonds. Each sip reminded you that survival was collective, not individual. If you had ale to drink, it meant the harvest had been stored, the barley brewed, the jars sealed. To taste it was to taste the labor of months, the promise of endurance through winter's dark. An offbeat tidbit worth noting: fragments of drinking horns and wooden cups found at sites show traces of resin or wax used to seal cracks. Cups were often repaired again and again, cherished because they held the power of ale. Imagine sipping from a horn passed down generations, its surface worn smooth by countless lips. The vessel itself became part of the ritual, familiar and comforting, as much a companion as the drink. The effect of ale shapes the hall now. Snores grow louder, deeper, as bodies sink into heavy slumber. A child stirs and giggles, perhaps drunk only on the warm atmosphere, before curling back against her mother. A man mutters nonsense words before slipping into silence. You smile faintly, realizing ale not only warms but loosens tongues, weaving humor into the night before dreams claim everyone. Some researchers argue that mild intoxication may even have aided survival, by lowering anxiety, dulling aches, and making the smoky air more tolerable. Ale turned the Longhouse into a more bearable place to sleep. Others counter that it increased risk fires left untended, quarrels sparked, or tempers flared. You imagine both scenarios vividly, one hall lulled to peaceful slumber, another disturbed by drunken argument echoing against the beams. Survival was always a balance between relief and danger. You shift onto your side, letting the furs cocoon you. Your belly hums with warmth, your head feels pleasantly heavy. The fire glows faintly, but it is the ale that seals your surrender to the night. You sense it in others, too, the softened breaths, the relaxed limbs sprawled against neighbors, the way even the animals seem calmer in the shared haze. And yet, the Vikings never saw ale purely as escape. It was sacred as well as practical. Offerings of drink were poured into the fire or onto the ground to honor gods and ancestors. To drink before sleep was, in a way, to join them in ritual, to carry their blessing into dreams. You picture the watchman earlier, perhaps pouring a few drops onto the hearth before taking his own sip, sealing the hall in unseen protection. A curious sensation creeps over you now, the edge of dream sharpened by ale. The line between waking and sleeping blurs. Visions come quicker, stranger. Perhaps this is what sagas mean when they speak of ale dreams, moments when gods whispered in the night after feasts. Your own mind stirs with images of ships on stormy seas, of firelight flashing from distant mountains. They are fragments, impossible to hold, but vivid enough to make you shiver. The hall seems quieter now. Wolves are silent, dogs sigh contentedly, children breathe steadily. The only sound is the occasional crack of an ember, answered by the slow, deep chorus of snores. The ale has done its work, soothing hunger, loosening tension, softening minds into rest. You close your eyes, the warmth spreading through you, and accept its embrace. For in this hall, sleep is not a fragile luxury, but a victory. Fire, furs, bodies, and ale combine to guard against the endless night. And as your thoughts dissolve into haze, you realize you are no longer merely surviving. You are surrendering, trusting the hall, the drink, and the company of kin to carry you safely into dreams. The ale's warmth lingers in your belly, and you curl deeper into the furs. But as your eyes wander across the hall, you notice something you hadn't paid close attention to before the arrangement of sleepers. Not everyone rests equally. Even here, where the goal is collective survival, hierarchy shapes the night. The Longhouse, for all its shared warmth, reflects the invisible lines of rank and status, even in sleep. It is well recorded in sagas and reconstructions that the chieftain or head of household claimed the high seat during the day, a carved bench near the hearth. By night, this same position gave him prime warmth, closest to the fire's glow. Guests of honor lay nearby, sharing in the comfort of radiance. The benches at the far ends or against the draft-prone walls were left for thralls, servants, or the less favored. Tonight you can see it clearly: the best furs, the softest hides, and the brightest firelight are gathered in the center, while the edges fade into shadow and chill. Something unexpected is how bedding itself marked rank. Wealthier individuals might sleep on layered hides, even padded with straw or imported textiles. A thrall, by contrast, might have nothing more than a coarse blanket or a thin animal skin between his body and the floor. Archaeological digs at Viking farms have uncovered scraps of down feathers, suggesting that elites had softer sleeping surfaces, while others endured the scratch and chill of rougher hides. You glance toward the dim corners now, where bodies huddle tighter, cloaks pulled across faces, a reminder that not every sleeper drifts equally into rest. Researchers continue to debate just how rigid this nighttime hierarchy was. Some argue that the necessity of warmth meant rules bent easily if a storm howled fiercely enough. Perhaps even a servant was allowed closer to the fire. Others insist that the social order was absolute, that status determined not just your work but the very degree of comfort you experienced in sleep. You suspect reality lay between, practical adjustments layered atop unyielding customs. The difference is not only in warmth but in noise and smell. The central sleepers are spared the worst of the drafts, while those at the edges cough more often, stir restlessly, and shiver beneath thinner coverings. You hear it now, a thrall shifting in the dark, scratching at lice, his cough rasping harshly in the smoky air. No one moves to comfort him. Status dictates endurance, and he must find his own way through the night. A small but telling detail is the role of gender in this arrangement. Women often slept beside children, forming protective bundles. Men clustered near the fire, especially guests and warriors. Yet within households, arrangements could shift depending on who needed protection most: elders, infants, or valuable visitors. You imagine the negotiations, silent but firm. Who lies near the center, who takes the chill of the wall? Each decision is both practical and symbolic, shaping the nightly map of survival. Oddly enough, some sagas note resentment simmering in these arrangements. A man slighted by being placed far from the hearth might grumble, interpreting the position as insult rather than necessity. Hospitality was measured not only by feasts but by sleeping spots, and a poor place at night could carry political sting. Imagine waking with frost on your cloak and realizing your host ranked you beneath a stranger. Even in sleep, pride could be wounded. The social map extends to the animals too. Cattle, sources of wealth and survival, were tethered within, their placement carefully chosen. A prized cow might stand nearest the warmth, while goats or pigs were left at the colder edges. In this way, livestock reflected hierarchy as much as people did. Wealth was protected at the core, the expendable pushed outward. You hear it tonight. The cow snorts near the hearth's glow, while a goat bleats faintly in the shadows. Historians remain uncertain whether thralls always slept inside. Some suggest they may have been relegated to outbuildings when space allowed. But in brutal winters, even the lowest-ranked person was valuable as a contributor to body heat, and so they curled in the shadows of the hall, both included and excluded part of the furnace, yet never of the hearth. The weight of hierarchy presses on you as you lie back. Warmth, comfort, even the luxury of dreaming, none of these are equal. The hall is one body, yes, but each part feels the night differently. The chest near the heart beats warm, while the extremities shiver. This arrangement mirrors the society itself, tightly bound, yet stratified. Survival shared, but never evenly. And yet, you sense a paradox. For all the inequality, the Longhouse demands togetherness. Thralls and masters, guests and kin, animals and humans all breathe the same smoky air, all listen to the same wolves outside, all rely on the same fire. The hall enforces hierarchy, but it also binds everyone into one fragile cocoon. You close your eyes again, reflecting that even the lowest sleeper contributes warmth to the highest. Without them, the balance would falter. A creak echoes as someone shifts at the fire's edge, tossing another log onto the embers. Sparks rise, lighting faces both weary and peaceful. For a moment, the glow unites everyone in a single blanket of light, before shadows reclaim the edges. You tuck yourself deeper into the furs, feeling both the closeness and the divisions, and allow the hall's complex rhythm, equal parts community, and rank to lull you once more into uneasy, essential sleep. You stir again, and this time your attention falls not on the sleepers themselves but on the small luxuries woven among the hides and cloaks. Most of what surrounds you is rough, local, practical wool, reindeer skin, goat hair, yet here and there you notice finer textures, softer folds, hints of colour. These are gifts of the world beyond Scandinavia, treasures carried along the sprawling trading routes that reach deep into Europe, the Middle East, and even Asia. In the Viking Longhouse, bedding was not always entirely homegrown. Archaeological finds confirm that imported textiles and feathers sometimes made their way into Viking households. Fragments of silk from as far away as Byzantium have been uncovered in graves, though rare and costly. Goose down and eider down, softer and warmer than any sheepskin, may have been acquired through trade or plunder. Imagine curling beneath a quilt filled with delicate feathers, so light compared to the heavy hides you've been enduring. For the wealthiest Vikings, this was not a fantasy but a genuine, if precious, comfort. Something curious is how these luxuries also served as status symbols. To display imported cloth or feather bedding was to declare power, wealth, and connection. A guest who arrived and was given such finery to sleep upon would understand instantly that their host commanded resources beyond the local. You look across the hall now, and notice one bench with furs layered more neatly, a faint shimmer of dyed textile folded atop. Not everyone here sleeps equally, and not everyone sleeps on the same materials. Specialists disagree on how widespread such imports were. Some argue they were confined almost exclusively to elites, appearing rarely in ordinary halls. Others suggest that smaller traces, perhaps a strip of silk trim, a few handfuls of feathers filtered into many households through trade, making luxury a matter of degree. You feel the tension in this debate as you run your fingers across the coarse reindeer hide beneath you, imagining how different it would feel to sink into something feather-light. A quirky little fact is that some sagas describe bedding as gifts exchanged during alliances. A chieftain might send a guest home not only with weapons or jewelry, but with blankets or cloaks woven with foreign dyes. To receive such a gift was to carry a piece of prestige into one's own hall, a visible reminder of favour. Bedding was not just a tool for sleep, it was a marker of connection, a portable signal of rank. The presence of luxury here also carried practical benefits. Down feathers trapped heat far more efficiently than coarse hides, meaning that a smaller number of sleepers could stay warmer with the same covering. You imagine a wealthy couple cocooned in feather quilts near the fire, while their thralls huddle in scratchy hides against the wall. Warmth itself became a currency, traded unevenly within the hall. The contrast was stark. For the majority, bedding smelled of musk, of lanolin, of smoke and dust. For the few, imported cloth might carry hints of spice or dye, faint reminders of distant lands. Archaeologists have even found traces of madder root, which produced a red dye, and indigo, which gave deep blue. You picture lying down in the smoky dark and glimpsing a streak of red or blue fabric glowing faintly in the firelight, a touch of the exotic amid the monotony of brown wool and grey fur. Historians also puzzle over how long such luxuries lasted in the damp, smoky hall environment. Did silk fray quickly, feathers flatten after a season, colours fade under soot, or were these items guarded carefully, brought out only on special nights, reserved for honoured guests? You sense the latter is likely. The hall you lie in feels practical, utilitarian, not wasteful. A quilt of feathers would not be risked on an ordinary night. It would be saved, perhaps, for moments of pride and display. Yet tonight, as you curl against your reindeer hide, you can still sense the power of those luxuries. Even if you do not touch them, they shape the atmosphere. A hall that owns imported goods is a hall of prestige. Every sleeper within, even the humblest thrall, shares in a fragment of that aura. To lie in such a place is to feel linked to the vast web of trade that stretched from icy fjords to bustling cities thousands of miles away. The Longhouse groans, smoke drifts, wolves howl faintly beyond the walls, but inside, feathers and silk whisper of Byzantium, of Baghdad, of the Silk Road itself. Sleepers here may never travel so far, yet they rest with tokens of those distant worlds brushing their skin. You realize that survival was never purely local. Even slumber carried echoes of faraway lands. And so you draw the hide tighter, imagining the softness of down, the shimmer of silk. You drift into dreams filled not with wolves or sagas, but with markets under foreign suns, where merchants trade cloth for silver, feathers for amber. In the Longhouse, even as snow piles against the roof, you are never entirely cut off. Trade routes reach you here, in your bed of hides, shaping the way you sleep through the endless night. The fire glows softly, the imported furs shimmer faintly in the lamplight, and most sleepers drift in heavy stillness. Yet the night is never only a matter of warmth, fabric, and food. For the Vikings, the darkness carried more than cold, it carried mystery. In the Longhouse, as bodies pressed together and storms raged outside, people also whispered of things unseen, the spirits that walked the night. What we know with confidence is that Norse cosmology was steeped in beings who did not rest when humans did. Draugr, the restless dead, were said to rise from their graves and wander, bringing illness or misfortune. Elves and land spirits lingered at the edges of fields, some helpful, others mischievous. Trolls and giants prowled the wild. When night stretched endlessly in winter, these ideas pressed close. To sleep was to make yourself vulnerable not only to frost, but to forces that could not be nailed shut behind a timber door. Something curious is how ordinary sounds could be reimagined through this lens. A creak of the rafters might mean a spirit stepping overhead. A dog's sudden bark might signal a ghostly visitor. Even the howls of wolves, which you heard earlier, could be heard as omens of the dead travelling through the dark. You listen now, and every groan of the beam seems doubled in meaning, both wood expanding in the cold and something otherworldly testing the walls. Specialists remain divided on whether such superstitions dominated nightly life or whether they were occasional murmurs. Some argue that practical survival left little energy for constant fear, that spirits were spoken of more in sagas than in daily habit. Others suggest that with death so near, illness, raids, famine, belief in nightly wanderers was a steady undercurrent. You sense tonight that both perspectives intertwine. Even if people laughed by day, when the lamps burned low and shadows stretched long, fears inevitably returned. A quirky little detail is that amulets were sometimes hung near beds, not just worn. A Thor's hammer carved in wood might dangle from a beam above sleepers, or a small pouch of herbs might be tucked beneath a child's blanket. These were more than tokens, they were defenses, silent shields against the unknown. You can almost see them now, swaying gently in the smoky air, their presence reassuring to the half-awake eye. The hall itself seems complicit in these beliefs. Smoke gathers in thick folds, shadows twist along the rafters, and the occasional flicker of flame carves shapes that vanish as quickly as they appear. Your tired mind turns them into figures, tall, hunched, looming. Were they truly there, or were they only smoke? For the Viking sleeper, that question mattered less than the feeling. The uncanny was real because it was felt. You hear a whisper near the hearth. Someone, half asleep, mutters a short charm. It is simple, little more than a plea for peace, perhaps taught by a grandmother. In such moments, superstition blends seamlessly with ritual. No one mocks, no one interrupts. Everyone knows the comfort it brings. You wonder how many prayers and charms drifted nightly through halls like this, lost to smoke but woven into survival. Historians also puzzle over whether Christian influence softened or hardened these fears. As the new faith spread, the language of saints and devils mingled with older spirits. A creak might be blamed on a demon instead of a Draugr. A blessing might be spoken in Christ's name rather than Odin's. Yet the function was the same: to make sense of the dark, to give shape to the unease that no fur or fire could wholly banish. The presence of animals adds to the mystery. A cow suddenly lifts her head, staring into the dark as though she sees something unseen. A dog growls softly at nothing. These moments, ordinary to you, could confirm for others that spirits truly walked. You shift uneasily, half convinced yourself that the darkness beyond the hearth hides more than cold air. But here lies the paradox. Fear of spirits may have haunted these nights, yet it also created comfort. To believe in wandering souls was to believe you were not alone. Ancestors might be near, watching, protecting. A dream might be interpreted as a visitation, not a trick of smoke. Even the eerie became a way of feeling connection, of softening the loneliness of endless winter. You pull your cloak tighter, aware of the amulets glinting faintly, the charms whispered, the watchful eyes of animals. The hall breathes with you, but so too does the unseen. You realize that Viking sleep was never simply physical rest. It was a negotiation with the spirit world, an uneasy truce with forces both protective and hostile. Outside, the storm rages. Wolves howl faintly again. Beams creak. Shadows sway. Inside, charms dangle. Furs cocoon. Whispers murmur. Between them stretches the fragile boundary where humans dared to sleep, never certain whether the night belonged only to themselves. And so you drift, half comforted, half wary, knowing that in the Viking mind, dreams were not private. They were shared with spirits, ancestors, and gods who passed unseen through smoky rafters. Sleep was survival, yes, but it was also surrender to a world larger than the hall itself. The night stretches on, and though the fire glows steady and the charms sway faintly in the rafters, another presence makes itself known. This one is not ghostly, nor wild, nor imagined. It is sickness, unwelcome but unavoidable in a hall where dozens of bodies, animals, and smoke all share the same stale air. You hear it first in the rasping cough of a man near the wall, then in the wheeze of a child curled beneath her mother's cloak. The Longhouse, for all its strength, is also a cradle of contagion. Archaeological evidence shows that Viking settlements bore the marks of chronic illness. Skeletal remains reveal signs of tuberculosis, respiratory damage, and parasitic infections. Living cheek by jowl with kin and cattle, with smoke thick in every breath, meant that sickness was never far away. Tonight, you feel it yourself, the sting in your eyes from soot, the heaviness in your chest, the faint itch of your throat. If you lived here all winter, the cough might become your constant companion. Something unusual is that some researchers suggest the smoky air was both curse and cure. On one hand, it damaged lungs and weakened children. On the other, the smoke may have deterred pests and slowed the spread of bacteria in meat and hides. You lie beneath the haze and wonder, is this hall killing its sleepers slowly, or keeping them alive? Perhaps both truths coil together in the air above you. The sounds of sickness ripple through the night. A child whimpers as fever burns. Her mother murmurs a lullaby to soothe her back to fitful rest. A man groans and shifts, clutching his chest before quieting again. The cough of one sleeper sets off another, a chorus of weakness hidden beneath the surface of communal survival. You hear it and realize, rest is fragile here, always threatened by the body's betrayals. Historians remain divided on how Vikings treated such ailments. Some point to herbal remedies, yarrow, juniper, garlic burned, brewed, or chewed to ease symptoms. Others argue that care was largely supportive: warmth, food, prayers, and patience. Without modern knowledge, they fought sickness with instinct and tradition. In the hall tonight, you sense that same balance: mothers tucking children closer, men pulling hides tighter, someone muttering a charm against fever. A curious little fact: in some sagas, illness was attributed to supernatural causes, witchcraft, curses, or the wrath of gods. If a person wasted away, it might be said that spirits had drained them, or that envy had struck them down. Treatments therefore blurred between medicine and magic. A bowl of broth might be followed by a whispered charm, a poultice laid on a chest while runes were carved nearby. You imagine such rituals unfolding in this hall, where every cough could carry both natural and mystical meaning. The smell of sickness is distinct. Sweat clings sharp in the smoky air, mingling with manure, wool, and damp hides. A sour tang marks the feverish child. A bitter musk hangs around the coughing man. These odors are not masked but absorbed into the hall itself, becoming part of its nightly atmosphere. You breathe them in whether you wish to or not, just as everyone else does. There's debate among archaeologists whether families accepted illness as inevitable or feared it as contagious. Some argue that with death, such a constant presence, people grew stoic, treating coughs and fevers as natural as hunger. Others suggest that dread hung heavy, with every winter bringing the possibility of outbreaks that could claim entire households. You listen to the fragile breathing around you and suspect both responses coexisted, resignation wrapped in worry, endurance laced with fear. An offbeat but telling tidbit, lice and fleas, beyond causing discomfort, also carried disease. Excavations of Viking latrines show eggs of parasites like whipworm and roundworm, confirming that unseen afflictions weakened bodies constantly. So even as sleepers scratched at bites, their guts churned with infections, you shift uncomfortably, realizing how inescapable illness was here woven into every layer of life, from skin to stomach to lungs. And yet, the hall persists. Despite the coughs, despite the fever, most sleepers breathe steadily. The community absorbs sickness the way it absorbs smoke, thick, unavoidable but endured. A child's cry is soothed. A man's groan fades. A woman's charm hums softly in the dark. The hall holds it all, weaving weakness into the rhythm of survival. You turn on your side, aware of the fragility pressing close. Here, health is not guaranteed, not even expected. To wake without fever, to breathe without pain is already fortune. Each morning greeted is a victory. You feel the truth of that now, listening to the coughs echo like warnings through the smoky rafters. And yet you also feel the resilience. The sleepers shift, sigh and dream. The fire glows. The hall exhales. Life persists even when sickness presses near. You close your eyes again, accepting the blend of fear and endurance that defined every Viking night. Illness may creep through the hall, but so does stubbornness, the will to breathe one more time, to see another dawn, no matter how smoky or bitter the air. The smoky air thickens again, and you shift beneath the hides, your chest heavy but your ears keen. Beyond the coughs, the snores, the restless animals, you begin to notice something stranger sounds that seem to come from no clear source. A knock against timber, a whisper of wind through the rafters, a faint, dragging scrape like claws on soil. In the Viking mind, such noises did not go unexplained. They belonged to the realm of dreams, omens, and things unseen. We know from sagas and folklore that nighttime was a fertile ground for superstition. Dreams, as you've already sensed, were treated as potential messages. But alongside dreams came other signs: knocks, visions, shadows, and feelings heavy as stone. The Vikings did not separate the physical and the spiritual as neatly as you might wish. If you woke in the dark and heard something strange, it mattered. It could shape decisions the following day, or even alter the course of life. What may surprise you is that animals often became part of these interpretations. A dog whining in its sleep might be seen as warning of bad luck. A cow suddenly kicking her tether could be interpreted as a sign of coming death. Even the hoot of an owl outside might be woven into the hall's whispered beliefs. You hear it now, the low, eerie call of a bird carried through the storm. For you, it is just sound. For the Viking dreamer, it could be an omen of sickness or a death soon to arrive. There is disagreement among scholars about how deeply these nightly omens influenced daily behavior. Some argue they were taken very seriously, prompting offerings or altered plans. Others believe many were shrugged off unless reinforced by further signs. But as you lie half awake, it is easy to see how repetition, every cough, Every groan of timber, every cry of an animal could build into a pattern too strong to ignore. An offbeat little detail. Some sagas describe dreams in which animals or even objects spoke. A plough might whisper of failing crops, or a wolf might warn of betrayal. These dream visions blurred seamlessly with waking noises. Imagine lying in the smoky hall, half asleep, hearing the creak of a bench and believing it to be the voice of a spirit disguised as wood. For people who lived constantly with the uncanny, this was not absurd. It was simply part of life. You shift, unsettled, and the fur brushes against your cheek. The movement conjures its own shadow on the wall, which flickers in firelight. For a heartbeat, you mistake it for something else. Tall, hunched, almost human. Your heart quickens before reason steadies you. And yet, you realize, reason might not have been enough for the Viking sleeper beside you. A shape in the smoke could easily become a draugr, a restless dead, come to sit on your chest and steal your breath. Historians still argue about whether such tales of draugr reflected literal belief or symbolic storytelling. Were people genuinely terrified of corpses walking at night, or were these simply narrative devices in sagas? Evidence leans both ways. But lying in the Longhouse, smoke heavy, air thick, sounds strange. You understand why belief flourished. The environment itself breeds unease. A curious practice occasionally mentioned is the placing of iron objects near bedding. Iron was thought to repel spirits. A small knife tucked under a pillow or hung above a beam might serve as shield against nightmares. You imagine the comfort this gave, knowing that if a draugr wandered in, you had more than blankets for defense. Perhaps someone nearby tonight sleeps with such a talisman hidden at hand. The hall seems alive with ambiguous sounds. A goat snorts, but you hear it as a sigh. A sleeper turns, but it feels like footsteps. The fire cracks, and you think of bones breaking. In this haze, meaning is pliable, molded by fear, shaped by belief. For the Vikings, omens were everywhere, because the night offered endless raw material for them. And yet, there is comfort in the ritual of interpreting them. To give meaning to every sound was to wrestle control back from chaos. A cough means the gods are displeased, so you make an offering. A shadow means ancestors visit, so you welcome them. Belief transformed unease into action. You feel it now. As much as fear lingers, it is softened by explanation. Even superstition is preferable to senselessness. You pull your cloak tighter, listening as the hall groans again. Perhaps it is only timber settling. Perhaps it is something else. Either way, you are reminded that Viking nights were never neutral. They carried weight, layered with signs, symbols, whispers, and interpretations. To sleep here was not only to rest, but to drift into a dialogue with the unseen, to share the dark with more than bodies and beasts. The sounds ebb again, replaced by the slow, collective breathing of the hall. You exhale too, aware that the night may still bring new omens, new noises, new visions. For now, though, you accept them, as the Vikings did. Folded into the fabric of survival, another layer of meaning beneath the hides. And slowly, uneasily, you let yourself drift again, wondering what the night will whisper next. The night inches forward, and as you lie among the sleepers, a new awareness creeps in. This hall is not just shelter, not just warmth and shadow. It is also a theatre of intimacy and tension. With dozens of bodies pressed together, privacy is impossible, and yet, somehow, human closeness still finds its way into the smoky dark. We know from sagas and legal codes that the Longhouse doubled as both domestic and social stage. Families ate here, worked here, argued here, and inevitably slept here. But to sleep shoulder to shoulder meant navigating not only coughs and snores, but also affections and quarrels. Tonight, as the fire glows faintly, you can sense the undercurrent of both. A sigh of tenderness here, a muttered grumble there. The hall is a hive of emotions, barely restrained by the need for rest. Something unexpected is how couples managed intimacy in such conditions. Privacy was rare, but not non-existent. Furs could be pulled higher, benches shifted closer, a cloak spread wide enough to conceal more than warmth. Archaeologists have found evidence of wider benches in some longhouses, perhaps designed to accommodate pairs. Imagine trying to fall asleep as whispers rise a few feet away, or as the hides stir with movements that clearly have little to do with shivering from cold. For the Vikings, love and desire did not pause in winter. They merely adapted to communal life. Scholars remain divided on how tolerated such behavior was. Some argue that with survival the highest priority, households accepted intimacy as natural, ignoring it as long as it didn't disturb others. Others suggest tension was inevitable. Jealousy sparked, modesty bruised, arguments flared. You can picture both scenarios. One hall where giggles beneath furs are met with knowing smiles, another where harsh whispers break into anger. The truth likely shifted with each household's temperament. A quirky detail worth noting: sagas sometimes mention lovers sneaking out to barns or byres at night. Perhaps the cold was worth the secrecy, the frost on breath preferable to the judgment of kin. But on bitter nights like this one, most intimacy stayed in the hall, hidden in plain sight, another sound folded into the night's chorus. And then there are the quarrels. A shove in sleep mistaken for insult, a snore too loud, a blanket pulled too far. In sagas, feuds often spark from seemingly small slights, and you can imagine how quickly tempers might flare in such close quarters. One man's elbow becomes another man's grievance. One whispered word turns into a muttered curse. Tonight you hear it faintly, a hissed retort, a rustle of furs, then silence again, tension tucked back under the hides. Historians debate whether the Longhouse's closeness fostered unity or friction. Did forced proximity bind families tighter, teaching patience and compromise? Or did it breed simmering resentments, waiting for daylight to erupt? Evidence points both ways. You sense it now. Love and anger, tenderness and frustration, all coiled together under the same smoky roof. The animals, too, add their own complications. A cow shifting too close to the fire, a goat tugging at its tether, a dog barking at shadows. Each disruption provokes muttered annoyance, sometimes laughter, sometimes genuine irritation. The hall is never entirely still. Every body, human or beast, demands space in a place where space is scarce. An offbeat but telling observation is how bonds were reaffirmed even in the night. A parent reaches out to calm a child. A hand brushes another's shoulder in wordless comfort. A whispered apology smooths over a quarrel. These tiny gestures, invisible by day, may have been as vital as food or fire. In the dark, with no privacy and no escape, people learn to live together through small acts of patience. The firelight catches on faces turned toward one another, eyes half open, lips moving faintly. Perhaps they are murmuring of the next day's chores, perhaps of deeper matters, hopes, fears, promises. In such closeness, words are cheap yet precious. Even if dozens of others lie within earshot, the illusion of intimacy can bloom under a single cloak. And always the tension of survival looms. To quarrel too harshly risks fracturing the unity that keeps the hall alive. To indulge too freely risks offending those who share the same furs. The balance is delicate, fragile as flame. Tonight, you feel it keenly. A hall both shelter and crucible, where every sigh and shuffle carries more meaning than it would in solitude. You roll onto your side, furs rustling, and feel the weight of your neighbor's shoulder against yours. It is not intimacy, not hostility, just the simple fact of survival. Yet in that touch lies the whole truth of the Longhouse. No one endures winter alone. Bodies collide, emotions spark, affections bloom, resentments simmer. All are folded into the smoky air, woven into the nightly rhythm. And as you close your eyes again, you realize that this blend of closeness and conflict is not weakness but strength. It is precisely because the Longhouse forces people to live so tightly together that they learn to navigate the rough edges of being human. The hall may creak, quarrels may stir, lovers may whisper, but the community endures bound by fire, by furs, by necessity, and by the endless dark outside. The hall settles once more, sighs and murmurs fading back into rhythm. Yet even in half-sleep you notice how often someone stirs, rises, or shifts through the night. Sleep here is not the uninterrupted kind you might expect in a quieter age. It comes in fragments, broken by coughs, by fire tending, by quarrels, by dreams. The Viking Longhouse was a cradle of segmented rest. It's widely accepted among historians that before artificial light and strict modern schedules, people often slept in 2 or more bouts, waking for a time in the middle of the night before sinking back again. Evidence from medieval Europe suggests this first sleep and second sleep pattern was common, and there are hints the Vikings lived it too. Tonight, as you lie listening, you sense the truth of it. Not everyone is dreaming. A few figures sit upright, muttering softly, tending coals, whispering prayers. What may surprise you is how these wakeful intervals became useful. A mother might nurse her child. A man might check livestock tethers. A woman might mend a garment by firelight. These moments of wakefulness were not wasted. They were woven seamlessly into the fabric of survival. You hear it now, the soft scrape of wool against wood. Someone working a spindle even in the dead of night, turning idleness into necessity. Scholars remain uncertain whether segmented sleep was universal or varied by season. Some argue the long, dark winters encouraged it, while summers with short nights may have allowed deeper, uninterrupted rest. Others think climate mattered less than habit, and that broken sleep was simply the human default before clocks and candles. In the smoky hall tonight, you feel the plausibility of both. Darkness invites long hours indoors, and long hours invite pauses between rest. A curious tidbit worth noting: in some folklore, the waking period between sleeps was considered spiritually potent. People whispered prayers, interpreted dreams, or even sought visions during this liminal time. To be awake while most others slumbered was to stand at the threshold between worlds. You imagine a figure kneeling quietly by the hearth, whispering to unseen gods while the rest of the hall snored around him. The rhythm of segmented sleep reveals itself in the sounds. Snores rise and fall, punctuated by sudden wakeful noises, a log shifting, a bench creaking, footsteps padding to the hearth. Then silence again, and the hall sinks back into a collective lull. It feels less like one long stretch of rest and more like waves lapping against the shore. Advance, retreat, advance again. Historians still argue whether this broken pattern left people fatigued, or if it suited the body naturally. Some modern studies suggest humans are wired for such cycles, that waking briefly in the night is not a flaw but a forgotten norm. Others caution that smoky air, lice and noise likely left Vikings far more tired than we romanticize. You, scratching absently at your arm and blinking through the haze, suspect both may be true. The rhythm may be natural, but it is not always restful. An odd little observation: some sagas describe moments of conversation in the middle of the night, where family members shared dreams or plans during these wakeful intervals. Imagine murmuring of tomorrow's fishing, or confessing a worry, while others slept nearby. The dark became a pocket of intimacy, a secret shared in whispers that daylight might not permit. Perhaps tonight, as you drift, others around you are doing just that, trading quiet words while the rest of the hall dreams. You notice how the animals fit this rhythm too. A cow stands, shifts, and lies down again. A dog rises, circles once, then curls back to sleep. Their movements echo human patterns, reinforcing the sense that segmented rest is not disorder but natural cadence. The longhouse itself becomes a living body, each limb moving in turn, never entirely still yet, never fully awake. The air grows warmer as another log catches. You realize someone has tended the fire again, likely during their wakeful interval. This small act reminds you that the hall's survival depends not on uninterrupted slumber, but on these fragments moments where wakefulness serves the group, keeping flames alive, tending beasts, soothing children. Broken sleep is not weakness, it is strategy. You pull your fur tighter, eyelids drooping once more. Around you, the hall breathes in stages, some awake, some dreaming, some stirring. You drift again, knowing you too may wake in an hour, scratch at your cloak, stare into the smoke, and then sink once more into rest. This is the rhythm of the Viking night. Not one stretch, but many. Not silence, but waves of noise. Not privacy, but a communal ebb and flow. And as you surrender again, you understand. Survival is not about perfect sleep, but about enough. Enough warmth, enough breath, enough rest in fragments to rise again when dawn finally arrives. The hall does not promise comfort, but it promises continuity, and that is what carries everyone through the endless winter dark. The night feels endless, but in truth it is edging toward dawn. The air in the hall is heavier than ever, thick with smoke and the accumulated breath of sleepers, yet the fire has dimmed to a low red glow. This is the hour when weariness is deepest, when even the watchful dogs sigh and curl their tails tighter. And yet this is also when the dreams run strongest. In the Viking Longhouse, the boundary between myth and memory was always thinnest before first light. It is well attested in saga literature that prophetic dreams often came in the hours just before morning. A warrior might see his own death foreshadowed. A farmer might dream of poor harvests or sudden storms. These visions were not dismissed as mere tricks of sleep, they were treated as glimpses into truth. Tonight, you sense it. The sleepers around you shift and murmur, caught in dreams vivid enough to stir the heavy furs. Something curious is how these dreams often blended personal life with myth. A woman might dream of weaving, but the loom's threads stretched into storm clouds. A child might dream of running across fields, only to see wolves with glowing eyes at the horizon. For the Vikings, gods and spirits slipped easily into these visions, just as the smoke and flickering shadows here slip into your half-conscious thoughts. You hear a sleeper mutter Odin's name, his voice urgent, as though speaking directly to the All-Father through dream. Scholars remain divided on whether these dreams were recounted openly each morning or kept private. Some sagas describe men announcing their visions at breakfast, prompting discussion and even changes in household plans. Others suggest dreams were shared only with seers or trusted kin, interpreted carefully before decisions were made. You can imagine both: the communal retelling of a dream that warned of danger, or the quiet confession of a troubling vision whispered only to a spouse. An unusual tidbit comes from later folklore. Some believe dreams that came during the first sleep were meaningless, but those that appeared closer to dawn carried weight. Perhaps the Vikings too felt this difference. As you lie in the smoky haze, you sense your own mind drifting into sharper visions, more vivid than those earlier in the night. You dream not of vague shadows, but of sails unfurling, of icy seas, of voices chanting in languages you do not know. The Longhouse environment itself feeds the potency of these dreams. Smoke curls into strange shapes, animals grunt and snort, sleepers mutter. Your brain stitches it all into narrative. A cow's low moan becomes the voice of a giant. A child's cough transforms into a raven's cry. No wonder sagas brim with dream visions when you sleep in such a place. The line between reality and myth dissolves easily. Historians still puzzle over whether dreams were considered binding, like fate, or negotiable, like warnings. Some sagas show men marching to certain death because their dreams foretold it. Others show heroes trying to outwit fate, changing plans or making offerings to gods. You cannot decide which is more terrifying: to believe every dream seals your destiny, or to wake never knowing whether you have interpreted it correctly. The sleepers shift, sigh, and turn. One child whimpers, whispering of a nightmare. Her mother strokes her hair, soothing her back into slumber. Another man laughs softly in his sleep, perhaps chasing a dream of feasting or victory. Each dream is a private world, yet all of them spill into the same smoky air, carried together into dawn. A lesser-known practice may have softened these visions. charms spoken before bed to invite good dreams or ward off bad ones, a verse muttered, an amulet tucked under a pillow, a rune carved into a bedpost. You imagine such rituals performed here, quietly, almost invisibly, each sleeper trying to tilt the balance of fate. And still, the dreams come some bright, some dark, all vivid. You find yourself drifting deeper now, your own dream shaped by everything you've heard and smelled. Wolves outside, smoke above, whispers in the dark. You see the Longhouse from above, glowing like a lantern in a field of snow. You see the sleepers as sparks, each flickering with light, their dreams rising like smoke into the night sky. The vision lingers even as your body stirs, half waking. Perhaps it is only imagination, or perhaps, in Viking eyes, it is a true glimpse into something greater. The fire cracks faintly, a reminder that the hall is still anchored to earth. You exhale, aware of how fragile this moment is. Soon dawn will come, the fire will be stoked brighter, chores will begin, and dreams will scatter like mist. But for now, the hall belongs to visions, to spirits, to that strange liminal space where sleepers walk with gods and animals whisper in the dark. You curl deeper under your cloak, letting your own dreams blur again, carried along by the collective current. The Longhouse breathes, the fire glows faintly, the sleepers murmur, and in this final stretch before dawn, the hall becomes more than wood and turf. It becomes a bridge between worlds, a place where survival and vision, flesh and spirit, mingle until no line remains. The visions fade slowly, and when you next open your eyes, the air has shifted. It is not dawn yet, not fully, but a dim grey glow filters faintly through the smoke hole above. The night has loosened its grip, though it is not gone. This is the strange in-between hour when sleepers stir uneasily, caught between the heaviness of dreams and the pull of morning. In the Viking Longhouse, these moments were not idle, they were preparation. Archaeological reconstructions suggest that the first stirrings of morning often began while darkness still lingered. The hearth must be revived, animals checked, water fetched. The community could not afford to wait for full daylight, especially in the deep of winter, when daylight lasted only a few brief hours. Tonight, or rather, this early morning, you sense the same necessity. A figure rises quietly, tossing fresh logs onto the embers. Sparks leap, shadows shrink, and the hall grows incrementally warmer. What might surprise you is how noisy this transition could be. As soon as one person moved, others followed. A man coughed and spat into the straw. A child whimpered and begged for water. A dog stretched, shaking its fur with a sudden spray of dust. Privacy, non-existent through the night, became even thinner at this hour. The hall, once lulled by the rhythm of sleep, begins to hum with life again. There's debate among historians whether every member of the household rose at once, or whether duties staggered. Some argue that men lingered in warmth, while women and thralls began chores, first rekindling fire, milking cows, preparing morning meals. Others suggest the entire hall stirred together, necessity overriding comfort. Tonight, as you lie watching, you see both patterns, some still cocooned in hides, others already on their feet, resigned to the tasks that await. An offbeat little detail. Sagas sometimes mention morning greetings spoken in verse. A simple rhyme exchanged at dawn could be both charm and politeness, acknowledging the shared hardship of surviving another night. Imagine a half-asleep voice murmuring a line of poetry as he rises, answered by a sleepy chuckle from across the benches. In a hall so saturated with tension and closeness, such rituals may have softened the edges of waking. The bedding itself begins to shift. Cloaks are shaken free of frost and smoke. Hides are folded or pushed aside. Some are left where they lie, matted with straw, waiting for night to return. The smell of wool mingles with morning breath, acrid but familiar. You realize how quickly bedding transforms from cocoon to burden. The same furs that kept you alive now reek with sweat and smoke, clinging to you as you rise. Historians continue to puzzle over how often bedding was cleaned or rotated. Some suggest hides were beaten outside in the snow, others that they were rarely disturbed until spring thaw. Evidence is scarce. Yet here, watching figures tug at their cloaks, you sense that cleanliness was less priority than endurance. If the hides smelled, so be it, they still trapped warmth. Survival trumped comfort every time. The animals stir louder now. The cow lows, impatient for milking. Goats bleat sharply, their cries echoing off the rafters. A dog trots to the door, scratching at the timber. These sounds merge with human voices, creating a cacophony that signals the night's true end. In the Viking hall, the line between human and animal routine was blurred. Both shared the same dawn, the same space, the same urgency. Another curious tidbit: morning meals were often simple, sometimes no more than leftover porridge reheated or bread dipped into ale. Yet these small meals carried great psychological weight. To eat at dawn was to declare victory. You had endured the night, and now you had the strength to face another day. Imagine sipping warm broth after hours of smoky slumber, the taste dull but comforting. Arguments among specialists persist about how the household transitioned from sleeping order to working order. Did everyone fold bedding neatly, or did the hall remain cluttered with hides and straw throughout the day? Excavations show both neat arrangements and chaotic layers. Perhaps each hall reflected its own rhythm, some tidy, others perpetually strewn with the debris of survival. Looking around you now, you see chaos. Furs tossed aside, straw scattered, children stumbling groggy between benches. And yet, beneath the disarray, there is pride. Each sleeper who rises knows they have survived another night in winter's chokehold. The fire did not fail. The wolves did not breach the walls. The sickness did not claim them. However grim the hall feels, however acrid the smoke, the simple act of standing alive is triumph. You feel it yourself as you breathe deeper, your chest aching yet your body steady. The grey light through the smoke hole grows stronger. Soon dawn will paint the snow outside, and the hall will burst into full motion chores, meals, tasks of survival. But for now, this liminal moment lingers, half dream, half day, when the memory of night still clings to the furs and the promise of morning has only just begun. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, rise slowly, and glance once more at the benches. Sleep has ended, but the hall still bears its mark, creases in the hides, the smell of sweat, the faint echoes of snores and whispers. These are the imprints of the night, the silent evidence of endurance. And as you take your first unsteady steps toward the fire, you realize every dawn in the Longhouse was not just the start of a day, but the proof of a victory hard won. The grey light strengthens, pressing softly through the smoke hole, turning the haze above the hearth into a pale, glowing veil. Sleep has ended, though most bodies still shift groggily in their hides, rubbing eyes, scratching at wool, coughing into the thick air. You sit up slowly, cloak sliding from your shoulders, and for the first time the Longhouse feels more alive than asleep. The transition is gradual, but unmistakable. The household is waking. It is well established that Viking mornings began with immediate labour. There was no lingering in bed, no indulgent luxury. Fires had to be fed, livestock milked, tools checked, food prepared. The moment sleepers stirred, the hall became a workshop once again. You hear it already, wood clattering onto the hearth, a thrall tying on boots, a woman stirring ashes to reheat last night's porridge. The rhythm of sleep gives way to the rhythm of survival. Something perhaps unexpected is how much bedding itself had to be managed. Furs and cloaks were folded or shaken out, sometimes carried outside to beat away lice or shaken free of straw. Children were roused from cocoons, complaining faintly as they were unwrapped from layers of wool. A curious smell fills the hall now. Smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of damp hides stirred into motion. For the Vikings, this odour was the scent of morning itself. Scholars remain divided on whether bedding was carefully arranged each day, or simply left strewn until nightfall. Some evidence suggests households prized neatness, folding hides onto benches for seating during daylight. Others argue practicality ruled, and bedding stayed put, cluttering the benches until needed again. You look around the hall now and see both impulses. One bench neatly cleared, another still piled high with tangled furs where a thrall stretches drowsily. The children rise reluctantly, rubbing eyes, stumbling barefoot across the straw. A mother straightens her daughter's tunic, pulling a comb quickly through tangled hair. A boy scratches furiously at his scalp before being handed his own bone comb, the morning grooming ritual beginning anew. These small tasks, mundane to you, are essential here, rituals that mark the shift from sleeping body to working one. A curious tidbit: morning grooming often included rinsing with water that had frozen overnight, broken open from barrels or streams. Imagine the shock of ice-cold splash against your face after hours cocooned in warmth. The practice was bracing, a jolt that signaled day had truly begun. Perhaps some here still cling to that tradition, though in winter's deep, comfort often won over cleanliness. The animals demand attention next. The cow lows insistently, hooves stamping the straw. Goats bleat in chorus, hungry for feed. Dogs bark, tails wagging, eager for the door to open. These sounds fill the hall, drowning out the last remnants of snores. The line between human and animal labor blurs. The beasts need care as much as the fire or the people. For the Vikings, mourning was not only human business, but the shared awakening of every creature inside. Historians argue over whether men or women took the lead at dawn. Some sagas suggest men lingered, discussing plans for hunting or trading, while women and thralls busied themselves with food and fire. Others point to evidence of communal work, where everyone, regardless of rank, had morning tasks. Tonight, as dawn approaches, you feel the likelihood of both: duty divided by habit, but urgency binding all together. Breakfast itself is modest, sometimes little more than reheated stew or porridge. A pot is dragged nearer the flames, stirred until steam curls upward, carrying the smell of grain and meat. Wooden bowls clatter, spoons scrape, children reach eagerly, adults eat more slowly. The meal is not lavish, but it is victory on a spoon, proof that there is food to face another day. You can almost taste the salty, earthy porridge on your tongue, thick and heavy in the smoky air. A quirky note: ale is poured even in the morning, though weaker than what is shared at night. A sip chases down porridge, cleansing smoke from the throat, warming the belly. To outsiders, it might seem indulgent. To the Vikings, it was routine, as natural as breathing. The hall carries the faint yeasty tang, layered over the sharper scents of sweat and smoke. The light through the smoke hole grows brighter still, casting a pale rectangle on the floor. Children watch it eagerly, proof that the sun, however faint, has returned. Adults take it as their cue boots strapped tighter, cloaks thrown on, tools gathered. The hall has completed its nightly cycle, from warmth to slumber, to dreams to dawn. Scholars still debate whether waking felt triumphant or weary. Was each morning embraced with gratitude, or endured with resignation? The truth, perhaps, is both. To wake alive in winter was victory, but the tasks ahead were endless, grinding. You feel it now in your own limbs, the heaviness of fatigue laced with the strange pride of survival. The benches empty gradually, hides folded or ignored, children carried or pushed to their chores. Smoke rises thicker as more logs are thrown on. Light sharpens as the sun climbs slowly. The Longhouse is no longer a dormitory. It is once again the center of life, echoing with voices, footsteps, commands, and laughter. And you, sitting now by the fire, understand the rhythm in full. Sleep in the Longhouse is not comfort but endurance. It is bodies pressed together, lice creeping, wolves howling, smoke stinging, furs scratching, children whimpering, spirits imagined. It is also warmth shared, stories whispered, charms murmured, dreams woven, and mornings greeted. It is survival, and it is community. You close your eyes once more, not to sleep, but to reflect. The Viking night is over, but its lesson lingers. To endure such winters required more than furs and fire. It required patience, resilience, and above all, closeness both physical and emotional. No one survived alone. Every cough, every sigh, every shared dream was part of the Longhouse's heartbeat. And as the hall bursts into daylight, you carry that heartbeat with you, remembering what it felt like to drift through one night in a world where even sleep was shaped by survival. The fire now burns bright, daylight has crept across the floor, and the Viking household is fully awake. But for you, the story quiets. We have wandered together through the smoke and furs, listened to snores and whispers, felt the itch of lice and the warmth of cloaks, watched the fire flicker, heard the wolves outside, and breathed the same thick air that carried both dreams and omens. It has been a long night in the Longhouse, and now it is time to let go. As you lie back, allow the images to soften. Imagine the coals fading slowly into ash, their glow dimming into nothing. Picture the benches emptying, the cloaks folded, the animals shuffling into morning routine. The noise of the hall ebbs away until only a low hum remains, like the distant pulse of memory. The harsh edges blur the coughs, the quarrels, the howls, and what remains is the warmth. Bodies pressed together, voices sharing stories. The fires glow at the heart of it all. Your breath slows. The storm outside dissolves, the smoke clears, and the Longhouse becomes a quiet shell. You are no longer inside it, you are drifting above, watching from a safe, gentle distance. The hardships soften into story, the discomforts fade into whispers. What is left is the comfort of survival, of endurance, of human closeness in the face of endless dark. Let that closeness cradle you now. Let the steady breath of the hall merge with your own. Let the night's journey fade into silence. Sleep well, dream gently, and carry the warmth of the Longhouse with you into your own rest.